The city was pitch black, but inside one lit-up house the room was a total wreck. Right in the middle of it all stood this guy, staring at his wallet and hyped that he finally saved up enough cash. Akina Shoji was finally done being a corporate slave, so he quit his job to start his own business, and left the office feeling lucky he didn't make his boss mad after all that crazy. After saving up months of pay to open a shop he saw in a magazine, our hero finally ditched his job to start a life of total freedom. His head starts spinning and he realizes he pulled another all-nighter. This was basically a normal day for him. He's about to pass out, and every time it happens, it literally. Even as he passed out, he had a huge smile on his face, already planning to get right back to work the second he woke up. A bit later, a scream from someone wearing a crown jolts Aquina awake, and she finds herself on the floor of a strange palace right in the middle of a magic circle. 4 people, including armored soldiers and mages, were staring him down, and just as he thought he was dreaming, King Rui spoke from his throne to tell him this was no fantasy. Shoji realized his dream was actually about being summoned to another world, where the hero meets a king who explains that demons are totally wrecking the kingdom. They actually managed to summon a hero and begged for his help, but the guy thought their dream was totally lame and told them he didn't have any power at all. Please provide the text you'd like me to rewrite so I can get this story moving for you. Akina was super nervous as he said the special phrase, and suddenly, a stat window popped up right in his face. He was totally shocked when a floating screen popped up showing his name, age, and even his secret special ability. It was a cultivation skill, and the hero realized he could grow anything in the dirt at insane speeds, making the king super hyped for this god-tier power. As soon as the boy explained his power, the king and his crew were totally let down, even talking about tossing him aside or using him as bait while they summoned a real hero. The king shut everyone up and told them they were supposed to eat him, but the hero was the only one who actually stood up to object. Rui ordered everyone to use their skills to feed the nation and gave Shoji a field near the city. But Shoji was way more interested in starting his own massive business. A while later, our hero was standing in the field feeling totally bored, since the king let him stay there for a week, and he basically spent the whole time stuck in a deep sleep. He tried growing some veggies with his skill, really hoping it would actually be good for something. He could grow plants in just a few days, but that was literally his only power, and he got bored of it fast. By the 8th day, he started questioning if this was even real, so he went straight to the king and told him everything that was going down. He thanked Rui and then showed off the veggies he grew with his skill, totally blowing the king and his whole squad away. The king wanted to end the famine, so he offered to buy up every single bit of his harvest. Since the king was in such a great mood, Akina asked how much longer he'd. Before the king could even wrap his head around it, the kid explained that he was just waiting for a new ruler to take over so he could finally go home. But then he realized the brutal truth. There was absolutely no turning back. A bit later, the hero gets totally wasted and starts trashing the king, screaming that he never even wanted to be summoned to this world. After grinding hard and saving every penny without even getting his family's house, he still ended up as just a regular farmer. Once he finally chilled out, he thought back to the past and knew he couldn't let that same disaster happen all over again. His parents were busy farmers who spent all day in the fields, leaving him totally on his own. He found ways to keep himself busy, but his chill life was about to come to a crashing end. His parents worked non-stop to pay back their massive debt, but the grind was so intense that his dad actually died from it. His dad's insurance cleared the debt, but right as Shoji became an adult, his mom passed away too, so he ditched the farm life to get a normal job and find his own path. After years of grinding at a boring desk job, he studied and saved every penny to start a massive company, and finally lived the dream life he always wanted. Akina realized he couldn't open an account in this new world, so he chugged his last bottle and decided he'd just start making the drinks himself. He thought this was a total genius move, so he rushed to the field to bury the bottle, praying that beer tree would sprout up fast. He blacked out right there in the field, and by the time morning rolled around, Shoji woke up with a massive hangover. He realized he was totally broke, but then he looked up and spotted a crazy tree with bottles hanging from its branches. He was totally shocked to see so many bottles when he only planted one, but then he remembered his cultivation skill and decided to just taste the tree's liquor to see if this world was legit. He pops the bottle open, pours a glass, and after one sip, he realizes this stuff is actually top tier. After brewing his own stash of drinks, Akina hit up a bar in the kingdom's busy shopping district. He offered to buy every last drop of liquor, but the merchant saw the huge pile of bottles and figured they were definitely stolen. The guy promised it was a gift, so the seller tried a bottle, planning to buy the rest if it was actually legit. He took one sip of the drink and offered 8 silver coins for the whole batch, which was a total steal since the quality was actually top tier. With the deal finally closed, the hero asked how to make the item himself, claiming it was actually meant to be a gift. Once the seller said he could just learn the recipe at the brewery, he realized that this world actually had a normal way to make alcohol. Akina asked about the skills and found out she wasn't the only one who had them. He thought farming skills were actually a thing, but the merchant told him that only the fighters were making the big bucks. He saw that everyone thought his farming skills were a joke, so he realized he could totally use that to his advantage. He heads out of the bar to grab some hot items and soon finds himself standing right in front of a massive garden filled with all sorts of loot. Shields, swords, and even potions were popping straight out of the dirt as he tested his powers on everything he could find to finally master his skill. He put up a fence to keep things safe, and when Akina saw the crops, she was totally blown away that his skill lets him grow literally anything. If he didn't have seeds, he'd just bury the whole thing like a potato, proving he was totally unhinged. But since normal fruit grew overnight, it made everything else feel like a waste of time. This dude's secret weapon was a crazy plant that grew coins on its branches, letting him sprout his own fake cash. Akina knew the king and his squad would find out about his insane skills any second, so he decided to beef up the fence and find a new boss to back him up. Once the king saw how OP that skill was, he planned to make you his servant and keep all that power for himself so he wouldn't end up like his parents. This guy was torn between joining the underworld or starting his own business so he could finally live a chill life like he always dreamed of. With his crazy new skill, he knew he could pull it off, so he decided to become a traveling merchant and started prepping right away. Akina paid her way into the merchant guild, snagged a new cart, and sold off the harvest to get some starting cash. A little while later, everything was finally ready to go, and our hero remembered how he used to work way too hard just to save some cash before he got stuck in this crazy new world forever. Just as he was heading out on his journey, he was 100% sure he was going to start his own business. Finally, no one could control him anymore, so he was going to give it everything he had to live life his own way. A bit later, he was ready to hit the road, but he hired a bodyguard first so he wouldn't get jumped by any bandits. He also wanted to hire a stunning girl who could take down the enemy in total style using a super flashy weapon. He really hoped so, but right in front of him, this girl is face down and whining because she somehow snapped her weapon again on a totally basic escort mission. The guy noticed the girl he hired was acting super weird, but he just figured it was all part of the job. Shoji spots a girl sobbing on the ground over her shattered weapon, and it takes him right back to the moment he first met the guy who destroys them. He was all geared up and waiting for his ride when the guild adventurers suddenly showed up to meet him. When Shogi introduced himself, he could tell right away that these adventurers were people he could actually trust. The squad had Kyle the warrior, Keiva the archer, and a girl with such silky hair that our main guy couldn't help but notice how gorgeous she was. She was super pretty, but he quickly realized she was actually gripping a massive steel rod. The girl introduces herself and says she bashes enemies with that metal rod, and Akina thinks it's a genius way to fight since you can't judge someone by their looks. Her teammates begged her to stop breaking her gear and quit dragging them down, making the hero start to seriously doubt her. He was totally shocked that the solid metal pond actually shattered, since he figured she'd be the one with a broken weapon. A little while after teaming up, the crew hit the road with a rickety cart rattling behind them. Eventually, our hero got super bored and just wanted to chat, so he asked the squad how long they'd been working together, but they totally denied having any connection to the gun killer. He saw Mine get super hyped and wondered how she got that name, but just as he started to tell the story, a loud shout cut him off. A bunch of screaming thugs from the Bloody Idiots gang suddenly surrounded the crew, demanding their cash and the girl, but the heroes didn't even flinch and were ready to take them down. The archer stepped up as the leader, telling Shoji to stay hidden in the cart while he barked orders at the rest of the squad. The guy locked himself inside the carriage and watched everything go down through a tiny window. The wagon was basically a safe zone where the hero could freak out about the fight while still watching his friends show off their insane power. The archer starts sniping enemies on Mars, shouting that they're just prizes for his quest, and even a total noob like Shoji can tell this guy is a beast. Nearby, the team's spearman was busy shredding through enemies to show his boss exactly how powerful he is. Shoji saw only 2 people were actually fighting, so he looked right at the girl who was told to jump into the mix. Mine charged straight at the enemy with her staff, leaving the guy totally confused about how she was actually going to fight. Watching her move, he totally doubted she was a real adventurer. But then, with her eyes squeezed shut in fear, she suddenly slammed her fist right into the robber's stomach. Right as he was making fun of the girl, a crazy force from the staff slammed into him and launched him into the sky, leaving the attackers and the guy in the cart completely shocked. Once their buddy hit the ground after that huge fall, the rest of the bandits got totally spooked and ran for their lives. Shoji could tell she was a total powerhouse, but then she suddenly collapsed by the broken iron bar and started crying her eyes out. He was totally stunned that the thick metal rod snapped like a toothpick, wondering what kind of crazy power could even do that. So this is how the warrior's legend finally wrapped up. This girl was so insanely strong that she shattered every single weapon she tried to use. That's exactly how she earned the terrifying nickname. A bit later, she's humming to herself while running with that sweet new mithril sword she scored from the bandits. Her friends begged her to sell the sword before she broke it since it was worth 200 gold coins, and hearing that price made the hero realize he could make a fortune by growing and selling them. But she wasn't selling that new sword for anything, swearing to everyone that she'd never let it go or let it break. The archer shouted for everyone to pick up the pace and reach the city fast, because even after all that trouble, they were finally getting close. A bit later, the merchant and his whole squad finally rolled into the city, squeezing through the super narrow streets. The squad finally laid eyes on a massive trading city in this new world, where everyone was hustling, and they were ready to kick off their very first business. A bit later, Akina told his mercenaries to get some rest outside the tavern, thinking the city was totally safe, and they had a big day of trading ahead. The warriors were pretty nervous about the deal, but once he promised to pay them every single cent, he totally won their respect. The squad split up right after, with Kava chilling at a tavern, and Kyle hitting on girls while the hero tried to get used to how things work in this world. While everyone else was heading out, she stayed behind and nervously called out to him with a favor. A bit later, she shows up totally out of breath, but she's somehow lugging 5 massive boxes like they weigh absolutely nothing. She helped Shoji lug those heavy boxes around and told him it was no big deal at all. He hit up the merchant guild to open a shop in the market, and he had to bring Mine along because she wanted to be a saleswoman and use her crazy strength to haul heavy goods for extra. A bit later, Akina and Maine were chilling under the canopy and laying out their loot when Maine suddenly spotted some super pretty fabric in the pile. He pointed out the weird stitching to Shoji, wondering how it was made since it was actually a scrap from a handkerchief the hero left behind when he first got to this world. He handed one to a girl who was totally beaming as she thanked him, even though he knew it was just some random thing he'd bought a while back. He stacked all his loot on the counter ready to sell, but he got so hyped that he accidentally made way too much and totally went overboard. She was totally blown away by all the crazy stuff for sale until the hero realized this massive crowd was actually just full of regular middle-class shoppers. Shuji put the food up front and hid the pricey loot in the back, figuring that if a thief showed up, they'd just grab the cheap snacks and leave the expensive stuff alone. Once a crowd finally gathered, Aiken and Maine started shouting at the top of their lungs that their brand new traveling shop was officially open for business. A huge crowd of guys showed up after Mine called for them, and the hero was stoked because more customers meant he could finally sell all his massive loot. Back at the Akina trade market, Shuji just announced he's opening a mobile shop to sell all those items he grew with his skills. The buyers were totally shocked to see piles of food, drinks, and even clothes, but our hero felt like there was way too much stuff here. Everyone's jaw dropped when customers actually paid 2 gold coins for the food. And even the hero was stunned since he was still thinking about the 200 yen vegetable prices from his old world. He totally forgot the kingdom was low on food and only bumped his price up by 8 copper coins, which was still way cheaper than anyone else. Next up, everyone was eyeing the dried meat, and it was going for 30 copper coins. Everyone was losing their minds because the meat was way cheaper than in Zappa store, making it an absolute steal. Once the crowd heard those prices, they started buying whole cases at a time, and after the meat and veggies were gone, they just kept grabbing whatever else was left. A bit later, our hero let out a tired sigh, still totally shocked by how fast all his stuff sold out. Suddenly, another huge wave of moms swarmed the place, and Akina quickly told them that all the food was gone and only the clothes were left. Even though it was used, the quality was top tier, and it cost 3 gold coins, leaving the locals totally shocked by the price once again. Back home, you could get a decent outfit for about 2,000 yen, so he figured 3 gold coins was a total steal for this market. The girls bolted and told Choji to wait a sec, leaving him totally stunned, but then they suddenly reappeared with huge bags of cash and bought out the whole store before anyone could even blink. Aquina hit up a thrift store just once and scored a massive haul, but while the food sold out in a flash, she was still stuck with a mountain of used clothes. He was flying through boxes of clothes for the ladies, but when he turned to grab more, he realized every single box was empty. He'd sold out of everything. The hero announced he was already sold out, which totally blew the other merchants' minds because it was barely even morning yet. He promised to bring way more stuff next time, and he was totally shocked by how much this housewife loved scoring a good deal. A bit later, the girl was super hyped about Shogi's success. The warrior was blown away by his trading skills, and they finally reached the capital without running into a single bandit. Just as they realized they weren't there yet, another pack of bandits ambushed them for the exact same reason. As the archers and spearmen got ready for war, Len pulled out her sword and offered to take them all on solo just to show the enemy how much power her blade was really packing. Everyone could tell she'd totally changed since the last fight, but her squad was still begging her not to wreck her weapon. The squad pulled it together during the bandit ambush as Shoji dove into the cart, and Mine charged out with a shout to land a perfect hit. Since it's a mithril blade, you already know it can tank at least one hit without snapping. She yelled that she wasn't done yet and charged the rest of the guys, even slicing a solid steel club clean in half. Mine was picking off every single enemy with total focus, and while Aquinas saw her moves were way better than before, there was still one major problem even though she was still in the fight. After just a few hits, the mithril sword totally shattered under the girl's insane strength, and Mine wouldn't have even noticed if the hero hadn't called it out. After the fight, she was totally wiped out, and the warrior could tell her luck had officially run dry. The team never expected that mithril sword to actually shatter, which just proves Mine's strength is totally off the charts. This sword used to be a bandit's weapon, but now it's just straight-up trash. She refused to give up and kept hunting through the loot for more mythic weapons, but everyone realized she was just slashing them all to pieces anyway. Once the bandits were toast, the guys started roasting the girl until she was totally lost, and Akina noticed the boy's bad attitude, but totally got why he felt that way. Back at the royal capital, the hero finally paid the adventurer for their help, and they parted ways on totally good terms. As our hero drives along, he can't stop thinking about the girl, and how she really should have just met him halfway. Mine's power was totally insane, and the boy wondered if his cultivation skills could help her keep all that energy in check. He snapped out of it and realized he had to watch his own back, because the kingdom would either kill him for being useless, or turn him into their slave if they ever found out how broken his power actually was. Akina knew he had to get out of the kingdom ASAP, so he did some digging and found out the area near the capital was actually safe enough for people to go shopping. The rebandarts were outside the city, so he needed a bodyguard to stay safe, but he knew that warrior and archer he met earlier were already way too busy with other jobs. Akina decided that the next time he went out to trade, he was definitely hitting up the Adventurers Guild. The next day at the guild, the hero looks through the door and sees Mine being threatened into becoming a servant. The hero walks into the guild and is totally stunned when Mine screams that she's being hauled off because she can't pay the interest on her debts. Cyan was super annoyed by the whole situation and demanded to know the price, which turned out to be 1 gold coin a month plus 4 silver coins in interest. He had the cash, but paying wouldn't fix the real problem, so he spent 2 gold coins on a busted mithril sword instead. Now she had enough cash left to grab a brand new weapon, and she was seriously thankful for it. The loan shark grabbed the cash and stormed off, yelling that if Maine doesn't pay up next time, he's becoming a servant. Shoji asked Mine what went down and suggested they head over to the cafeteria across the street to talk about it. A little later, we're chilling at a table when she tells me her skill is literally called superhuman. It gave her a massive power boost, but she couldn't control it and ended up snapping every weapon she touched. They find out her skill is actually way more legendary than that basic cultivation power. Her buffs didn't stop the pain, so she was too scared to fight bare-handed, and since cheap gear was trash against strong monsters, she started buying high-end weapons on credit, which, he guessed her nickname was Gun Killer, and she admitted she kept getting kicked out of the army for constantly putting her teammates in danger. She was about to be forced into being a servant because she couldn't pay her debt, but our hero thought that was a totally messed up way to live. Back on the ground, he was just another worker for the company, and his boss had zero clue what this guy was truly capable of. But even with all that insane talent, nobody really got her, and she couldn't even use her full power. A little later, Shoji is dragging a heavy sack through the workshop district toward a building with a sword sign, but just as he's hoping he's in the right spot, Akin steps inside and catches the eye of the busy blacksmith, who tells his current customer to hang on for a sec. The kid was totally shocked to see a gnome for the first time, telling the blacksmith he'd never seen anyone like him back in his hometown. He just heard about a land with 0 gnomes and got straight to work, asking his client exactly what they wanted. The guy slams a massive bag down and dumps it out, spilling dozens of mithril swords that totally blow the blacksmith's mind. It was the same busted sword he bought earlier, but now his skill was making it grow and multiply like crazy. He wanted one fixed and the extra scraps turned into a new weapon, because he couldn't handle mithril on his own and needed a total pro. He asked if the dwarf could craft a blade even better than the original, and the blacksmith agreed right away, but it was going to cost him 20 gold coins. He didn't even care about the price and just tossed over a whole bag of gold coins up front. Seeing the guy really trusted him, the dwarf introduced himself as Mode and promised the hero he'd do whatever it takes to help out. A bit later, the guy was just stoked the blacksmith still trusted him after everything, so he made sure to show some major respect for the man's work. This dude figured the world had zero respect to give, and that people were only good for serving their bosses. He knew it was going to be a total struggle, but he was dead set on keeping his pride as a merchant in this world. 10 days later, he heads back to the guild to meet the guy, who offers him a mission and tells him to follow him to his office. The place looked just like a regular house, making Mine's mind go to some pretty wild places. But he told her to chill and asked how the repairs on her busted weapon were coming along. Then he straight up asked her if she wanted to be his bodyguard for good. He knew starting a business would be dangerous, so he made sure to have a bodyguard watching his back 24/7. She was worried he'd just snap every weapon he touched, but he told her not to sweat it and pointed to the gear hidden under the canvas. Akina yanked back the cloth to reveal dozens of swords, leaving the girl totally stunned by how many there were and how high quality they looked. Every single sword was made of pure mithril, and Mine was totally confused why such expensive gear was stuffed into these trashy-looking boxes. He promised that if she became his bodyguard, she could use all his weapons, even the mithril one, and he'd even pay off every cent she owes. The girl was totally dazed and realized she was in way over her head, so Shoji stepped in to lay down the ground rules for the job. She had to stay glued to his side while he worked, following him no matter how dangerous things got. Mine was totally stunned by the deal, and when she asked about the pay, he told her she'd earn 40 gold coins a month while he took the debt straight out of her check. She told him she was in the hole for 1,000 gold coins, and thanks to some insane interest, that debt was just spiraling out of control. Even though he owed a crazy 10 million yen, the hero promised he'd clear the whole debt with his very next payment. Mine was totally shocked by how much cash he had, but Shoji just wanted to know if she was down for the job. She still didn't trust him because he let her break weapons, paid her for the work, and was actually losing more money than the debt was even worth. He was banking on her having these insane powers, but he realized she just didn't know how to use them right. He grabbed her hands and told her she couldn't just let her crazy powers go to waste. He promised to hook her up with every weapon he could find to help her train. Even though he looked like a total fake, the hero gave her the choice to work for someone who actually saw her worth, which totally killed any doubts she was starting to have. He told her she was actually super strong and didn't have to put up with that nickname anymore, promising it would just be a fun memory one day. Seeing how insane Mayan's skills were, she begged to join his side so she could finally stop worrying about her own power. As they made the deal, she promised to stay by his side forever and go all out to protect him. He wiped his face on the guy's shirt, realizing he'd just scored a beast of a bodyguard who'd never leave after getting his debts paid and some sick new weapons. He was totally sure he'd hooked her up with a job at a great company working for the best boss ever. A little while later, the hero and his partner finally hit the road, with Mine officially hired as his bodyguard as they headed for the next city over. The road was starting to look pretty sketchy, but the girl had a ton of weapons strapped to her belt and was ready for anything. She was hyped to have so many weapons, and with a cart full of extra swords, she knew she'd have enough even if they all ended up breaking. Inside the stash were swords Maud had totally reworked, plus a bunch of items grown using that crazy hero skill. Mine swung her sword around and dared the enemies to bring it on whenever they were ready. The road was crawling with bandits, but Akina just wanted to get through without bumping into a single soul. Suddenly, massive monsters burst out of the forest and shook the whole ground, leaving the couple paralyzed with fear just by looking at them. When our hero finally sees those monsters, he realizes this new world is actually crawling with beasts. She explained that these forest bears usually stay deep in the woods, but they're actually super aggressive monsters that never back down. These guys were straight up hunting people down, and Akina knew escaping them was going to be a total nightmare. Mine told him not to worry because she could wreck them all as long as she had her weapon, and he was totally banking on her insane strength. She dives straight off the cart and starts wrecking the closest thugs. Just check out who she's taking on. Shoji was just waiting to see how much she'd improved, and she totally delivered by charging the bear at full speed and zipping behind it to dodge its claws. Peeking out the carriage window, the guy saw the girl's moves were getting way sharper, and she looked super confident. She blurs forward and hacks the bear's arm right off, making the hero realize that a normal warrior would have barely even scratched that monster. This tiny girl with insane superhuman strength just charged straight into the middle of the enemy crowd. She sliced one bear clean in half and then lunged at the others, taking them all out. Her mithril sword snapped right in half, but she didn't even care and just whipped out a fresh one from her belt. Mine smashed another monster, but then she saw a bunch of even angrier beasts staring her down with spit dripping from their mouths. She didn't even flinch as she lunged at the monsters, taking every single one of them out with one super smooth hit. Shoji could tell she was a totally different person now, because she used to hold back and doubt herself just because she was scared of her weapon breaking. Thanks to the hero's epic skill, Mine didn't have to stress about her weapon getting snatched away. She went totally all out with a massive smile on her face, acting like she wasn't afraid of anything. The monster screamed as he ripped into it, and while these bears usually need a literal cannon to go down, he was wrecking them with nothing but a sword. Right then, it finally clicked for the kid why the king and his crew were so desperate for a hero who could actually fight. Mine was a total beast on the battlefield, but this kingdom just didn't have what it takes to use her full power. She finished the fight feeling totally hyped because she could finally go all out without worrying about her weapon breaking. Once the fight ended, Mine and Shoji cheered while the girl swore to keep the hero safe, and Akino was just hyped to see her succeed as they all walked away with a big win. A month after Mine joined the team, the two of them stood right outside the loan shark's office, finally ready to pay off the girl's debt. Down a back alley in the capital, Akina and Maine headed straight for Golded, the shady loan shark office where she owed a ton of cash. Right before she stepped inside, she got a bad feeling because she still owed a whopping 1,000 gold coins. He totally got why she was tempted by that massive 10 million yen price tag, but he promised he'd pay it all off and finally set her free. The girl was feeling super uneasy, but the hero told her to stop looking so down and head back inside. Mine swore she'd die to keep Shuji safe, so he trusted her and swung the office doors open, only to find a bunch of guys staring him down. Akina took one look at them and knew they were debt collectors, and they immediately started acting like total jerks just to show her who was boss. Our hero realized he'd totally forgotten how nasty people could be when he saw these loan sharks blowing smoke in a girl's face and mocking her for the money she owed. She felt totally powerless because of the money she owed, but Shoji stepped in right away to tell her he had her back. The hero looks right at the moneylenders and says he's paying off Mine's whole debt, leaving everyone in the room totally shocked. They figured she'd hooked up with some rich noble and paid off her debt just to make the boss super mad. Akina was totally confused why the boss was still so mad after the debt was paid, right as a guy stepped out from the back room to complain about all the shouting. This guy was the big boss of the moneylenders, decked out in pure gold and wearing the most expensive furs you've ever seen. The boss took one look at the girl and started mocking my boss, thinking she'd finally agreed to be his servant, and he even promised to treat her right since he's supposedly such a... He was just about to grab the girl when the hero suddenly intercepted him with a handshake, leaving the loan shark boss looking totally confused. Akina knew exactly what was coming, so he hid his fear and acted like a total saint just so Mine would protect him. He introduces himself as her boss and offers to pay off her debt since she's been helping him out at work. Gold reminded him that even if the kid was a nice boss, that 1,000-coin debt was way too much for even a rich noble to pay off. But then the other loan sharks spoke up and said the guys were actually going to pay back every single cent. Golded looked totally confused while pouring his drink, but once he realized Shogi was dead serious, he stayed quiet for a moment to wrap his head around it. Then he tells me Mine has a secret skill, but if he thinks he can use it, he's totally out of luck. He told him her skill is so crazy that she keeps snapping her weapons, making them totally useless, and asked if he still wanted to pay off her debt. Shiji told Maya he already knew about all her drama, and promised he was going to pay off every single cent of her debt. As soon as he said that, the moneylenders stared them down with pure hate, and our hero instantly felt a massive urge to kill. The second our hero offered to pay back the debt, these guys finally dropped the act and showed what they were really up to. Akina had no clue why Golded was so stressed about the money, especially since he lent it to Mine knowing he'd never get a single cent back. He remembered the boss stressing over her skills and gasped as he realized they were planning to keep her all to themselves. He actually planned to snatch the girl using her debt from the start, just so he could use her skills and have a strong servant to help him commit crimes. Akina saw this coming from a mile away, and he wasn't about to let these creeps take his favorite worker. Suddenly, the gold total jumped to 15,000 coins, and the hero was totally confused because they'd literally just settled on a different price. The boss claimed his team just messed up the math, and the shady loan sharks working with him backed up his story. The girl freaked out about her debt getting bigger, but Gold told her it was just all that interest stacking up. The manager looked totally smug as he forced them to crunch all those percentages by hand. He threw out this bait because he knew that in this world, only rich people and merchant apprentices actually know how to read or do math. Maine didn't even know how much he actually owed, and the company used that to totally play him. The boss just sat there with a smug grin, but Akina totally saw this coming and slammed 1,500 gold coins right onto the table. As the moneylenders just stood there in total shock, our hero told them there were exactly 1,500 gold coins on the table, and asked them to count it all up for him. The rest of the group was totally losing it because they couldn't believe this guy actually saw the whole thing coming. He scraped together a massive pile of cash, even if it meant racking up another 500 coins in debt. After they finally finished the math, Shoji handed over the cash and demanded a loan agreement to seal the deal. They rushed the contract over, And since Gold already signed his name, the kid was the only one left to sign it. With everything finally finished, the deal was sealed and his debt was wiped clean. The hero and the girl rushed to get out of there, but he caught the office manager flashing a totally fake smile. After a quick pause, the girl was totally blown away and thanked Choji, but Akina told her that things were just getting started. As night hits the city, the hero and the girl are just chilling and eating dinner at his place, right before the massive war with the Golden Company finally kicks off. A bit later, some shady guys started surrounding the hero's spot, and Shoji and I were right in the middle of dinner when a screen flashed to show us that people were arriving. Akina and her partner were totally ready for the robbers, and suddenly they hear a massive scream as two guys fall straight into their hidden wolf pit. Right then, it was finally time to strike back, so she grabbed a flaming log in each hand and headed outside while Shoji told her to be careful. Main casually walked out of the house right as one of the attackers spotted her, but he had no clue what she was about to do. She immediately chucked that flaming stick at the closest enemy and nailed him with a perfect hit. Mine's got such insane skills that even a basic torch becomes a deadly weapon in her hands. One bandit yelled for everyone to chill, since they just needed to find Shogi to win the whole thing. Kina handed the girl a fresh stack of torches, and they instantly zoomed straight toward the enemies. The guy with the eye patch yelled at his crew to dodge and quit sleeping on that torch, because this fighter actually has some serious skills. As more enemies closed in, she chucked burning torches right at their feet. The bandits were busy laughing at the guy's trash aim, but the girl finally cleared the view to show exactly where the enemy was hiding. He shoved the container into my hands, and I immediately charged straight at the enemies. She let out a huge shout and dumped the basket, giving those bandits zero time to even think. They were still totally clueless about what just hit them, but the hero and his buddy were already gearing up for round 2 while Aquino brought out another basin. The attackers tried to dodge and bolt, but it was useless because the blast spread out and hit every single one of them. The attackers realized they were sitting ducks and started scrambling to find any spot to take cover. The hero's house was fenced in by a hedge wall, and they chopped down the enemy's thick trees to turn them into torches. They tossed down flaming bars to light up the whole place, showing everyone there was absolutely nowhere left to hide. The hero handed her a basket of finishing moves that was actually just full of small stones from the field, which someone had gathered because they knew she'd be a beast with them. He calls his weapon a basket shotgun, and it slams right into their leader, leaving the rest of the crew totally clueless. Just as they were about to bolt, Shoji blocked their path and told them to surrender, or he'd take them down. The bandits realized they were in deep trouble, so they gave up and begged for their lives because they weren't about to die just for some cash. He told Mine to tie up the guys who surrendered while she hyped up Shoji's strategy, but he knew that trying to beat him with just numbers was a total waste of time. A little while later, the guy and his partner pulled up right to the office of those moneylenders. The group was totally exhausted from waiting all night for news, and they were completely blown away when they saw Shoji was actually still alive. Aquina had no clue what the moneylenders were talking about, so he asked to call Golded because they needed to have a super important talk. The staff told them to hang tight while they went to grab the boss, so the two of them just sat there and waited. A bit later, Goldig steps out of the doorway and asks what they're even doing there. Shoji told him that bandits raided his house yesterday, and without even waiting for the chief to answer, he jumped straight to the big news. He says these bandits smashed into his place and told him straight up that Goldat himself sent them to take him out. He just brushed off the bait and said he wasn't involved, but the guy wouldn't stop, claiming the attackers were now being held as slaves for their crimes. Aquina sarcastically says he's glad Golded isn't involved, but then he calls him out for trying to turn Mine into his personal servant. The loan shark finally lost his cool and kicked everyone out, telling them he just wanted to go to bed. Aquina figured he was just working late and told him he was totally wrecking his health. Knowing the military police were about to show up, he told everyone to forget about sleeping and headed out with Maine. She walked out in total silence, but later she was fuming because she didn't get why they had to mess with the moneylenders, and Mine was still shaking since she just couldn't stand being around Golded. But the hero told her to relax, explaining he did it on purpose to make the robbers hold back. The girl thought this was a total disaster since they'd definitely attack again. But that was exactly what Aquina wanted, and he told her they'd wait for things to cool down before striking so they could be way more prepared for the next round. Shoji knew the company was obsessed with their reputation, so he baited them into attacking way earlier than they planned. They just had to be friendly, and she was honestly shocked by how chill she felt in a spot like this. Back at his office on Earth, he was constantly dealing with shady people who were just as greedy as loan sharks. Later that night, the thugs sneak toward the house, completely unaware that our hero and his partner are tracking their every move. Next, the attackers slammed a pot down and used magic to make it start smoking like crazy. The entire house was swallowed up by this super weird toxic purple smoke. The hero spotted where the smoke was drifting, but Mine told him it was actually being steered by magic. After Shoji figured out how the magic worked, he wasn't even surprised because everything was happening exactly like he expected. When he saw that toxic smoke, the guy told everyone to chug a potion that stops poison, paralysis, and sleep. Shoji decided to switch things up, so he bought a bunch of potions and used his cultivation skill to make his money multiply like crazy. After scoring a full set of potions from the royal shop, he started thinking about flipping them for a massive profit. Right then, the robbers started wrecking the fence to build their camp, but the hero was already planning to make them fix every single bit of it. The bandits creep into the house only to find it totally empty, but as they push deeper into the shadows, two of them suddenly vanish, and they have no clue what's lurking in the dark. The entire house was basically one giant trap, and Mine was honestly shocked that someone actually fell for such a basic trick. Akina explains that the attackers are hiding in the dark, and have no clue there's actually a hole inside the house. Plus, that hole was crazy deep because Mine used her insane superhuman strength to dig it, which makes her perfect for heavy lifting. One of the thugs had no clue what was happening inside, so he yelled for the boss once he realized their robbery was totally busted. Gold showed up and ordered them to light up the house, so one of the mages fired a glowing ball of energy right inside. They finally saw a massive hole right in the middle of the house, and with the guy wide open, round 2 of the fight was officially on. The crooks spotted the trap, and after seeing the house was completely empty, they started hunting all over the place. Since the enemy literally couldn't kill her, she just charged straight into the front lines while you stayed safe in the back. Suddenly, he spotted a couple of hooded figures in the middle of the attackers, but he had no clue who they were. She charged right into the fight, and the enemy squad was totally stunned to see her holding a bunch of massive logs. Mane screams in total rage and chucks the logs at the shocked crowd, wrecking the whole house and taking out every single enemy. This was all part of Shoji's plan since the house was a total dump, and he knew he could just rebuild it later. Our hero uses his cultivation skill to spawn a bunch of logs and turn some into torches. She grabbed a couple of logs and charged right at the rest of the guys after her first hit. She dove straight into the running bandits and spun like a top, smashing into everyone and launching them into the air. The hero was totally blown away when Mine blasted another mage into the sky, and you could still see her light magic glowing in the air. Since they weren't allowed to kill her or use weapons, the thugs surrounded her and used giant logs to box her in. As they all piled on, they saw the log in Mine's hands was about to snap, and a second later, it totally shattered. The bandits thought they finally had a chance and charged in, but they totally forgot Shoji had already hooked her up with those insane mithril swords. With their backup, she totally crushed the attackers and sent them running, even though Gold tried his best to get them to stay calm. The boss of the moneylenders was fuming that only 2 guys showed up to face his massive army, so he stepped onto the field to handle it himself. Seeing his goons were totally useless, he ripped the cloak off the mystery man and ordered him to get in the fight. Aquina and his partner were totally shocked to see this massive guy decked out in armor from head to toe. The girl was totally blown away when Golden revealed I wasn't the only one with that skill, and she couldn't stop staring at the guy in armor. He told the girl she was right. This guy couldn't pay back his debts like Mine did, so now he's basically a slave to the moneylender. Gold had used his magic and barked an order, forcing the armored guy to go grab the girl. Out of nowhere, a massive blast almost crushed her, but she dodged it and told the hero to get back. Akina saw the girl slowing down, but she couldn't bring herself to strike since she knew her opponent was actually innocent. He thought Mai would slice right through that steel armor, but the moment she hit him, the defense didn't budge and her sword just snapped in half. The second they hit, the attacker started glowing and smashed Mine's weapon to pieces with a single strike. While the armored guy kept attacking, Gold explained that the servant's defense was so strong that even the girl would have a hard time. So that's why the armor was so tanky, because these skills don't just buff your body, they make your gear way stronger too. Gold had caught Mine and threatened her with a contract. Then he literally forced her to kill Shogi with her own hands. She was positive that even if a magic contract is forced on you, it still can't be used to order a kill. As the hero was thinking it over, Gold told him their office mage could actually whip up a super special contract. Everything finally clicked, but since Akina already saw it coming, Mine was the only one left totally shocked. She was totally losing it, worried he'd get dragged away in handcuffs once people saw what he was doing. Gold didn't care one bit though. It turns out some of the biggest nobles, rich people are always looking for someone to do their dirty work, so his office was constantly packed with high-paying clients. That contract forced the servants to stay quiet, giving those greedy moneylenders total control to do whatever they wanted. Anyone with half a brain could see the kingdom was totally corrupt, but people were still running their mouths about it like it was no big deal. Golded then ordered the armored guy to finally catch Mine by making him feel some real pain. While the girl was getting attacked, Shuji was stunned to see them using illegal magic just to torture her into following orders. She lunges at the enemy again, but her weapon shatters, and when she tries to grab a spare sword from Shoji, the other servants jump in to block her. She was defenseless with only a sheath to use, but then Mine looked at the hero and made a sudden move that caught him completely by surprise. Gold immediately orders another attack while she's empty-handed, and that knight with the crazy eyes just charges right at her. She grabbed the scabbard and ignored Shodu's warnings, lunging at the guy since he fell right into her trap. He slammed him with the scabbard, and the strike ripped right through his armor from his belt all the way up to his chest. Akina just realized that every single one of those hits was actually targeting the exact same spot. Those final hits were way too much for his defense skill, shattering it and leaving him with nothing but his basic armor. Mine hated watching the guy suffer while following orders. But the second he tried to attack her boss, she was ready to jump in and hit him with everything she had. After wrecking them with a massive combo, Mine landed and told Shoji she was his new bodyguard, and he was totally hyped about it. The bandits saw what happened and immediately booked it, totally ignoring their boss who was screaming at them to jump the heroes who didn't even have weapons. When she faced Goldad again, he hid behind his innocent servants like a total coward and bolted while screaming that he'd get his revenge. They totally missed the moneylender, and while Mine was super bummed, Shoji didn't even care because he knew Goldad was already toast. The nobles were guarding the office, but Akina still found a way to mess with things. 2 nights later, the guards swarmed the moneylender's office to investigate his shady business deals. Goldad totally bailed on his office and left his servants behind, so the soldiers started checking the magic contracts on everyone they found. It turns out that magic was totally hidden, and now Goldad the Loan Shark is officially wanted for illegal trading and faking his contracts. They're gonna split up all that loot, and once the bad guy is finally busted, everyone can finally relax. Mine was totally stunned that she and Shoji actually beat Goldad, because she couldn't wrap her head around how they took down someone protected by powerful nobles. He explained that some nobles actually hated the moneylender, and were ready to hook them up with some major inside info. Since Mine was totally confused, he had to break it down for her. He explained that shady nobles were guarding the place because they were illegally buying and selling servants, if anyone found out about this secret trade. The nobles were split into rival groups that were constantly at each other's throats, fighting for power. He told them he sent a letter about the moneylender to the nobles who were against him, and he even included those illegal contracts as proof. He hired the quietest pros at the guild to dig up all the secrets on Goldad's noble allies. Since you need a special letter just to talk to these nobles and Akina wanted to avoid them anyway, he found a super easy way to handle the whole thing. The hero slid some money to the mansion guards and told them to get those important documents to the nobles. Because of all the drama between the different groups, the nobles were actually stoked to start digging into Goldad. The girl was totally shocked by his crazy skills, but he was just remembering how his old office job back on Earth taught him everything about dealing with rival groups. The only one left was that Golder guy who escaped, but he's not a threat anymore since even his noble allies are hunting him down to hide their secrets. He knew a hero wasn't coming to save him, so he just wanted his partner to give it their all and reach a new city that very day. A little while later, the former loan shark boss is gasping for air in the city's back alleys, wondering how things went so wrong now that even his own crew has ditched him. He blamed Shoji for everything because if that hero hadn't interfered, Mine would have been his to use for a massive payday. That shady moneylender tried every trick to stop Maine from paying him back, but then Akina showed up and cleared her entire debt in one go. He fought off 2 attacks and sent guards to his office, but Goldad really only survived because of that secret tunnel in his room. Thinking back on everything, he swore he'd get his revenge by taking out the hero and forcing Mine to be his servant. To pull this off, he had to escape the country first, and he was already planning to steal a horse to make his getaway. He was totally lost in thought until his body suddenly flipped sideways and he went crashing down. He was totally stuck and couldn't even make a sound when some random stranger suddenly walked right up to him. He explained that Goldad was completely paralyzed and that the orders were to finish him off right then and there with zero torture. The moneylender couldn't even open his mouth to beg for mercy before his life was ended right then and there. A bit later, Akina was busy clearing out the ruins of a wrecked house on his land when the girl suddenly told Shoji that they had company. At first he had no clue who these people were, but then it hit him. They were the old servants who got snatched up during Goldad's attack. They said they owed him big time and wanted to show some real respect, so they dropped into a deep bow to thank him for saving their lives. One of them explains that since the hero showed up, they're finally free from being servants and all their debts are totally wiped out. The boy realized that to take down the nobles, the enemies were actually setting the servants free instead of selling them off at the market. Even after everything, the newly freed crowd was super grateful to the guy and swore they'd never forget his kindness or fail to pay him back. The guy asks if there's any real work left, because while some can just run back to their families, most people are totally out of luck. Everyone was struggling to remember anything, and it was honestly making them lose all hope. Akina only jumped in to get his hands on that useful mind, and he definitely wasn't looking for any extra drama. Suddenly, the girl pulls the hero aside and begs him to help these people. He totally got where she was coming from, but even if he raised the money, he couldn't possibly take care of that many people. Mine realized what was up and suggested hiring these guys to promote G's shop, since he'd probably be running his own store or leading caravans in the future. He knew that if he wanted to level up his business fast, he'd need a crew to handle all the selling for him. He realized Maine was totally right. His years in a boring office had killed his leadership skills, and he'd never reach his dream with that weak mindset. While he's stuck in his head, everyone is staring him down with eyes full of hope, just waiting for him to finally say something. He turned to face the massive crowd, and even though he was shaking from all those eyes on him, he announced he was hiring at his shop. Akina didn't care one bit that they used to be servants, and since everyone was on board, he decided to put his full trust in them. They begged him to take charge as the boss, and since he was a big-shot merchant with over a dozen employees, he was officially what this world calls a director. The new workers swore to follow Shoji for life, which totally weirded him out, and now he's stuck overthinking it every time he hires someone new. The next day, Akina heads straight to the capital's workshop district to see a blacksmith. As soon as they meet, the dwarf drops a bombshell. Someone is actually hunting down the hero. Our hero and his partner just stared at the gnome in total shock after he dropped that awful news. While hanging out at the workshop street forage, our hero realizes he's a marked man just because he's linked to Golden and the gun killer. So, a bunch of people showed up wanting to take out the hero, and they even tracked down the gnome to dig up some dirt. Akina tagged along with Mine to fix the weapon and hire the old servants. But that's right when they heard the whole story. Once gold was caught, all the nobles buying illegal servants got exposed, and the whole power balance between them totally flipped. Shogi figured the nobles sent assassins after taking a hit, and since he wasn't ready to die, the blacksmith told him to get out of there fast. Akina and his partner headed out after saying goodbye. But Maine felt so guilty she started apologizing. So he just stayed chill and talked through all the drama with her. She was totally loving how things were going between them. Shoji wanted to move fast and ditch the country right away to start their own business. But Mine had no idea how to handle all the new employees. Trying to escape with 12 people was way too risky, especially since he couldn't promise them jobs in another country. So he decided to just stick to the original plan. A little while later, a massive crowd of the old servants swarmed the merchant guild to get their paperwork signed. Akina and I were totally undercover, watching the new recruits get trained on how to be pro salespeople and master traders for the shop. Anyone who joined was treated awesome and given a job that fit exactly what they were best at. Later on, the crew is going to open a local shop to sell all that shoji stuff they grew in other countries. The Okinawa crew finally picked their escape route and are blending in as locals to stay hidden. After they finished plotting their big escape, the couple said goodbye to the staff and headed out. She warned him the border guards already knew they were coming thanks to magic, which totally shocked him since he didn't take this world seriously enough. He figured his only move was to ditch the country, but Maine warned him that even that was going to be a total nightmare. She warns them that tracking mages are guarding the border, and they'll hunt down anyone who tries to sneak past the main gate. There was no way to watch the whole border since tracking magic only worked in safe spots, leaving the dangerous areas totally off the grid. Maine pointed out that shipping stuff from overseas through those lands was basically impossible. Aquinas groaned about how tough it was to escape the country, but he still pulled off a supply run even though he had zero time to gather info. He thought he hit a total dead end and almost started over, but he couldn't just ditch the crew he'd already hired. Mine suggested heading to the Dark Forest of Destruction, a place crawling with monsters but totally safe from any tracking magic. Every kingdom left the forest standing so no one could use it as a shortcut for war, and the woods even blast out weird energy that totally drains a mage's power. This forest is basically the size of an entire country, but she still chose this dangerous path because she's totally confident in her skills. The hero agreed with me and said she wasn't just flexing Shoji's gear for show, because he realized those weapons were actually her greatest strength. Akina figured if he took over the forest, he'd have all the supplies he needed and could pick exactly where to go after his big escape. After getting the info, he told her they had to escape, but first they needed a plan to get through the woods and the right gear to survive. A bit later, Shoji hits up the capital's potion shop and realizes his partner is actually super dependable once she's locked in. The second he walked in, he realized this shop was nothing like the last one, and he was super hyped to see what was inside. While checking out the items and the crowd, our hero spotted a girl grabbing a potion right off the shelf. Shoji was totally caught up in how graceful and beautiful she looked. But Mine noticed him staring and snapped him back to reality by explaining that blue potions heal wounds, green ones fix poison, and yellow ones are for paralysis. You can tell how good a potion is just by how clear it looks, since the cheap stuff is always cloudy while the high-tier ones are crystal clear. The high-grade potions cost a literal fortune, so most people were way too broke to buy them, which makes sense for stuff you use once and it's gone. Mine tried to take charge and find some cheap but solid potions, but a guy suddenly cut her off and offered to buy a top-tier one right on the spot. He tuned out the rest of the talk and just looked at how clear the items were, figuring that if the forest was that dangerous, they must have brought back the absolute best loot. Suddenly, the hero walks up to the merchant and asks for 10 of every top-tier potion, leaving the whole crowd totally speechless. Buying up tons of those top-tier potions proved he was absolutely loaded, even though he looked like he didn't have a dime. People think Akina was actually a servant for some nobleman, and she never stopped keeping a close eye on him. Our hero realized he was acting just like a super-rich oil tycoon who walks into a shop and buys every single thing on the shelf. Suddenly, he locks eyes with that stunning girl, and even though she looks totally shocked to see him, she gives him a huge smile. One line out. The input is 2 sentences in 1 line. I should provide 1 line of text. Final choice. The hero totally missed the bad vibes from the meeting. Out of nowhere, Shoji spots a super weird potion and asks what the deal is. The shopkeeper tells him it's a monster protection potion, and if he sprinkles it on the cart, the smell will keep all the monsters away. If he uses it just once, no monsters will show up for a whole week, and Shoji thought that was a total win. That woman they just ran into swung back with a punch, but Mine was totally shocked since she'd never heard of a potion that could do something so crazy. The merchant scrambled to explain that a traveling mage sold them the goods, so the shop definitely made sure it actually worked. 1 potion cost 10 gold coins, which is insane because that same cash could hire a whole squad of adventurers for a full week. While everyone else was busy arguing over the price, our guy knew this stuff was legit and decided to buy as much as he could. Kina asks if the potion is actually legit, and the seller says the mage who made it guaranteed it could take down B-rank monsters. Mine spoke up right away, explaining that B-rank is actually meant for a whole squad of top-tier pros. The boy wanted to make things easier for Mine in the forest, so he decided to find out exactly how much that potion would sell for. Right after that, he started bidding, offering to buy out their entire stock for 6 gold coins a pop. It was wild that they bought everything, but 6 gold coins is way too low for all that stuff. She was still feeling unsure, but the seller suddenly agreed to sell them for 8 gold coins a pop. His partner keeps it real and says she honestly doesn't think they can sell it. Shoji asked his partner if this thing would blow up, but after thinking it over, she told him it was a total bust because hiring actual workers was way cheaper. The salesman told them to hang on and bolted into the back, and just a second later, 2 people came rushing right back out. The manager walks up and tells him that if he buys every potion in the shop, he can have them all for just 7 gold coins. Those potions cost a crazy 200 gold each, which is basically millions of yen in real money, so no wonder everyone was totally losing it. Aquina finally agreed to buy the whole lot, and the sellers were stoked to dump their old junk and get their money back. The guy dropped 40 gold pieces as a deposit to lock in the deal, promising to pay the rest once the goods showed up. Aquina headed home to plant those new potions, but she ended up running into that same beautiful girl from before. They cross paths yet again, and now our hero is seriously wondering if this girl is a stalker while Mine just stands there in a total daze. She started complaining because Shogi was staring at this curvy girl with long black hair like a total idiot. Aquina finally caught on and told her to head home and check things out, which totally cheered the girl up. Looking at that super dangerous dark zone, he came up with a wild plan all thanks to his monster protection potion. A little while later, the guy is staring at a massive dead snake while the girl stands right on top of it, asking if he's actually serious about living in a place like this. Shoji realizes that with the potion and Mine's power, they don't have to run anymore, so he claims the Dark Forest of Destruction as their new home base. Standing on top of the dead snake monster in the sunlight, Mine started thinking back to when the girl asked if they were really gonna live in a place like this. Rewinding to day 2 in the Dark Forest, our hero was totally drained from walking and finally crashed on the roots of a massive tree to take a break. Seeing how out of breath he is, his partner tells him they need to start training, totally forgetting that she's actually a superhuman. She noticed the forest was dead silent, which was super weird since monsters usually attack the second they see you. That monster protection potion actually worked, so it was totally worth the money. The monsters scrambled away the moment the potion vanished into thin air, and the hero finally knew the stories about its protection were legit. So right before they went in, the guy said they'd lose the people chasing them by disappearing into the Dark Forest of Destruction. Right after grabbing the potion, the hero decides to set up a base in the forest, making the girl ask why he's picking this spot. The guy warned them that even crossing the border wouldn't keep them safe, but at least nobody was following them through the forest right now. Right then, Mine was busy rigging something to a tree trunk. She had to set up the weapon because even with the potion, they were still in big trouble. When the hero said they had a problem, he was talking about the monster charging straight for them. This is an A-rank monster, the absolute king of the dark forest of destruction. It's a massive snake dragging around dead forest bears in its mouth like they're nothing. Shoji did some digging on the king of the forest and double-checked all his gear before finally heading into the woods. He scored a mithril sword forged by a dwarf and some light armor to protect all his weak spots. Once she finished prepping, the hero knew that taking out the forest king was the only way to stay safe and finally level up. Mine was totally confused why the guy thought killing the snake meant they could just move in when they hadn't even picked a spot for their base, but Akina just told her the monster had to go down first. Right as they're talking, the king of the forest himself towers over them, ready to strike from behind. Shoji knew the snake was coming, but it definitely showed up way earlier than he planned. In a split second, the snake lunges at the duo, and when the girl tries to block the hit, her sword literally shatters against the monster. That's when the girl decides to quit playing around and pulls out a real weapon. She drops into a battle stance and points her blade right at the snake's face. As leaves swirl around, the moment those leaves hit the dirt, the monster and I lunged forward, smashing through trees in a high-speed chase. She finally slashed the snake and followed up with another hit, but that just made the beast way angrier. The monster pounced, but Mine dodged the hit just in time, even though Shoji was totally freaking out. The hero was totally ready for that poison spray, so he blocked her next move and kept her from getting close enough to land a hit. Realizing things were looking hopeless, Akina yanked the cord the second that snake was in the perfect spot. Right then, she looked back and finally realized what they'd actually been setting up this whole time. The cord pulled a massive pile of potion boxes, and every single one dumped right onto the snake. The hero and Mine just set up a trap using monster protection potions, and when she got shocked by how many they had, he just claimed he went out and bought a whole bunch more. The potion recipe showed that monsters are actually terrified of poison, so even a crazy strong A-rank beast will freeze up the second it gets hit. The monster was totally paralyzed and wide open for an attack. Akina gave the signal, and the girl immediately started ripping trees right out of the ground. Even though she was terrified, she grabbed a tree. Maine had the snake pinned behind the trees in a double trap, and seeing her opening, she charged right at it. But a second later, the snake ripped its body free from the trap and lunged straight for Mine. She coiled her tail right around the girl, and the hero was totally panicking now that his partner was stuck in the snake's grip. Gross slime started oozing off the monster as tiny snakes crawled out of its tail and under Mine's clothes. But she broke free before getting bitten and told him not to underestimate her, leaving even the hero completely stunned. She reveals she's actually a bodyguard for a super-rich merchant, and that's the moment their wild new adventure officially begins. Their very first mission is taking down a massive monster. She shredded the monster into pieces to make sure it was finished, then stood on its body and hit a total victory pose. After seeing Mine's insane power, the hero finally got why Goldadu wanted her so badly, so he gave her a fat bonus that made her super happy. That's exactly how it went down, and when they got back to talking about life there, the hero claimed he was just low-key testing his partner's power and some potions so she wouldn't get stressed, while totally hiding the part about the trap. This let Mine actually stand its ground, and since the snake's territory was massive, its scary power and scent kept every other monster from even getting close. Since they won, they turned this spot into their brand new base by just rolling in a cart and setting up an office. For the next part of their adventure, Akina Shoji and his partner have to build an office right in the middle of a terrifying forest of destruction. Maine did most of the heavy lifting, while the boy stayed busy hammering nails and joining the wood. She started by flattening out the ground, using nothing but a single log to get the perfect spot ready for her new house. Next up was the foundation, and while the girl just chucks the supports into place with one throw, Shoji is stuck fitting every single log by hand. She finished building the log frame with one easy toss, and before long, the guy was already putting on the final touches. Akine and her partner went to check out their house from the side, and the workers were totally hyped because that stunning new office was finally finished. Even though he's a total rookie, he crushed it because his love for log houses and those old skills he still remembered really saved the day. Even with some construction going on, there hadn't been any earthquakes lately, so our hero figured he was totally in the clear. Behind one of those doors was the most important spot in the whole place, the growing field. They put up a fence around the field so the hero could finally work in peace, and not even Mine was supposed to mess with him. He had to stock up on monster defense potions and especially those mithril swords because they were completely sold out. She walks inside and is totally hyped to finally have her own room, a luxury that usually only the richest nobles or merchants can afford. The hero suggested grabbing some cool decorations for their rooms on their next city trip, and mine was totally hyped about it. He also couldn't figure out why the entire house was decked out in giant snake bones. To make sure she was totally safe, she started decorating the whole house with bones to keep those monsters away. The guy realized this was total proof of who owned the land, and after thinking for a second, mine turned and asked the hero a question. That question about the way he talked totally broke him, and he had no idea what he even did wrong. The girl reminded him she's his subordinate and asked him to just speak normally, exactly like he does with the modded blacksmith. She told him she'd be totally down to talk more casually, but then she got super embarrassed and apologized for saying that to just a security guard. Shoji actually got serious and realized he totally underestimated that super polite act. He thought it over for a second, agreed to her request, and started acting way more casual, which totally made her blush. After they finished the ritual again, he knew their whole vibe had changed, but he started shaking when she squeezed his hands way too hard, making her quickly apologize. Right now, our hero was seriously glad he'd actually splurged on those top-tier healing potions. A month later, the hero and his partner head to their shop, leaving their new city employees in charge of the place. She wasn't ready for their alone time to end, but the guy told her that an employee named Oguma already scouted the forest and confirmed they weren't being followed. Shoji figured the guys chasing him finally quit, so he spent the next month using his cultivation skills to grow a massive pile of loot. Plus, they had to head back anyway because they were totally broke and couldn't even pay their workers anymore. That forest was just a total cover for their office, so they headed back to the city to finally get to work. A bit later, they met up with Oguma and the rest of the staff who led them straight to the building. The new shop was super shiny, and after the hero complimented the small building, they told him he just had to see what was waiting for him inside. As he stepped inside, he was already picturing a super clean shop and staff looking sharp. The guy and his partner were totally blown away, and when the staff realized the boss had arrived, they all rushed to greet him, making him feel super awkward. He thanked the crew and told them to get back to it, since everyone was totally stressed out with the big boss showing up out of nowhere. Mine and Aquinas were totally loving the new shop, but Choji was stressing over the price tag since it was brand new and right on the main street. Oguma gave them a quick tour, showing them that even though the shop looked okay, there were hidden spots that were still totally trashed. The shop was a total wreck, with nothing but thin boards slapped on the outside to make it look halfway decent for the customers. See, a regular guy can't just own a massive epic building without a special permit, and he had absolutely no clue. To get your hands on it, you needed a solid reason, a mountain of cash, and a ton of trust, which was basically impossible to get unless you spent years trading in the market with the city's biggest players backing you up. That's how they managed to score the shop, even though it was tiny and totally falling apart. Since the building was ancient when they bought it, the staff gave it a quick glow-up just to convince the authorities they hadn't actually rebuilt anything. Oguma and the crew were doing an amazing job, and the hero realized that listening to mine and hiring them was a total win. The lackey also let it slip that they rented a small house nearby for the crew to stay in, exactly like Shoji ordered. They were totally blown away that servants used to live in such nice houses, and Ogam was seriously questioning what their actual jobs were. He seriously couldn't believe they actually got 2 days off a week instead of working every single day. Akina told them to take 2 days off and just chill, hoping they'd finally get some much-needed rest. Even though the former servants were totally skeptical about these amazing conditions, he promised they'd get paid for every bit of overtime since he was sick of the unpaid labor from his old corporate job. Our hero worked his heart out to make the shop a great company, and the staff was honestly so grateful for it. The hero asked when the shop would finally open since the staff were fully trained and just waiting for the stock to arrive. One of the employees used to be a big-shot general manager, so the hero trusts her to run the whole show. The hero and his partner were hyped with the result, so Aquina told them to unload the cart and pick out the very first items from the pile. Shoji asked if that price list he wanted from the royal capital was finally ready. The crew explained they only checked out the shops they could actually get into, since some spots are strictly for fancy nobles or professional woodworkers. He told them to keep tracking the prices just like that, already hyped and planning out exactly what their first product was going to be. He also asked for a bunch of cards to move all that loot right next to the dark forest of destruction. Our hero finally lets out a sigh of relief since everything is going perfectly, but just a week later, one of his workers comes up to Shoji. He was super hyped for the shop to open, but then someone unexpected showed up just to see the hero. Akina was totally hidden and couldn't believe someone found him, thinking it had to be those guys he thought he'd already shaken off. Oguma explained it was actually a woman who refused to leave until she saw the owner, proving she knew exactly how the boy felt about the shop. Oguma mentioned this stunning woman named Sasha, and her name sounded super familiar, like an adventurer I'd definitely heard of before. She said the woman was actually a total celebrity who spent her life researching legendary magic items. He still had no clue why such a legend needed him, so he rushed over to meet the guest right away. The second Akina saw that girl walk into his shop looking all fancy, he knew exactly who she was. It was that same stunning girl they met at the potion shop, and now she was actually thanking them for the tea. Main and Akina Shoji were chilling inside a hut while Main sparked up a glowing magic lamp. She showed him the magic item that stayed on fire even without oil, and Aquino was totally blown away. He figured Ogum brought this magic tool along with the report, and looking at it now, he realized he'd seen stuff just like it during the summoning, and when Golded's group attacked. The girl snapped her out of her deep thoughts to tell her that shops selling these lanterns are actually blowing up in the capital right now. She kept going on about how magic gear costs a ton of money and is seriously hard to make. He lifted the lantern high, thinking about how awesome it would be if his shop had a creator who could make items as cool as this magic lamp. He fixed his collar, knowing that finding the right person was going to be a total mission. Then he stepped into Aiken's room and apologized for the wait, explaining he was just busy changing his... Akina and Main sat down right across from that mysterious girl they met at the potion shop, and then Oguma just headed out. He called her Sasha-san, the legendary magic item researcher, making her realize she was actually becoming a total celebrity. He introduces himself as Akina Shoji, and drops the bomb that he actually owns the place, leaving the girl totally stunned. Akina asks what's up, and the girl realizes he's the same guy from the shop, totally shocked he's actually the owner. But this crazy coincidence is a total win. Sasha reintroduces herself as a mage who's all about studying magic items, and the leader admits he pretty much guessed that just by looking at her. He still thought she was a total mystery, and Main was ready to jump in if things got messy. Akina asked why she even wanted to meet up, and Sasha just said she had something to show. The girl lifted her skirt and stretched her leg out, letting Sasha grab a bundle she had hidden underneath. She even asks if her legs look good, but he just shuts his eyes, trying to figure out why she's showing them off, or why she's lifting her skirt, before letting out a super awkward cough. This gorgeous girl rips open the box to find some weird gear inside, making Akina and Main super curious about what they're looking at, until Sasha suddenly grabs a jug, points it. Water splashes out of the jug as a glowing magic circle forms, making the boy and the main character jump out of their seats in total shock. Everyone started freaking out, and while Main asked if it was a magic item, Aquino was losing it because his shop floor was literally sinking into the water. Sasha stayed totally chill and confirmed it was a magic item, explaining that just by hitting a switch, even people without powers could use magic gear. Pretty awesome, right? This was a super rare relic from a forgotten age of magic that suddenly sparked a new magic circle, swirling all the water on the floor into a massive funnel, while a stunned Akina begged to. Sasha raised her staff and explained that lost magic is way different from what they use now, since ancient times actually had a super advanced magical civilization. She was totally lost in her story, explaining how people back then used magic items for everything to build a super advanced world. The kids are totally locked in as Sasha picks up the next item, explaining that these ancient magic tools have special parts that are literally impossible to remake today. She grabbed the tool and explained that it can still blast wind magic even on low power. Then she clicked the button again. The moment she hits that button, both guys get blasted back into the wall, and while they're stuck on the floor, they're totally shocked to see the water around them just start drying up. They jumped up and he shouted that this power could easily crush any bandits nearby, and since it's way more insane than modern magic gear even at low power, Akina asked Sasha if she was actually going to sell it. She said no way because the magic stones were totally out of juice, and she even mashed the button to prove they were dead. Sasha finished her check and basically called the whole thing total junk, leaving Main in complete shock since those items were actually worth a fortune, while Akina just stood there thinking that was a pretty wild thing. Akina rubbed his chin and started plotting his next move, since he was itching for action and had a bunch of one-time magic items ready to go. The real deal finally kicked off the second Sasha finished checking the items, and told them she had an offer to make. She was gonna fix them up and get them working again, but the guys were totally confused and asked what she meant. Sasha holds up a magic staff and explains that these lost items are the absolute peak of tech, so advanced that even the smartest experts can't figure out how to fix or even understand them. Once she finally breaks down all that lost magic, she's gonna build an item that's way stronger than any of them. Sasha only came by to get Choji to pay for her research, but he told her she should just sell the whole thing to the government instead. She explained that permanent magicians had been hogging those public spots for ages, and as the guy thought about all the perks, Shoji suggested she just sell them to someone with serious clout. Sasha told them those nobles wanted way more than just her research, knowing in her head that what they really wanted was her. Shoji knew Sasha was a total 10, and compared to Main, she was way more grown up, which actually made him super angry if he ever forgot it. Shoji demanded to know why she picked him over all those other big-shot store owners, especially since his own business hadn't even officially started yet. Sasha starts pulling something right out of her chest and explains how she spotted Shoji, who's just totally confused about why she's keeping it in there. The guys were totally blown away to find a monster protection potion just sitting there in the shop. She held up the potion and revealed she actually brewed it using an ancient recipe found in the Legion ruins, and that's when it finally clicked for the guy. Main turns to Shoji and warns him that the late-year ruins are a total death trap, even for the most experienced adventurers. Sasha explains that ruin hunting is super expensive, and the ingredients cost a fortune, and to make things worse, Akina says their sales are totally tanking. Sasha gave up because it was way too expensive, but she hoped that if someone actually bought it, they'd finally understand her research. It finally clicked. Sasha was selling those monster protection potions just to bait a patron, and he was exactly the guy she was looking for. He was actually thinking about the cash the girl offered her to help fund that lost magic research. Main and Shoji sat there in total silence, but Shoji was already dreaming big about becoming the ultimate free trader in this world. The kid realized he had a totally broken mass production skill called skill cultivation by store and guard, and looking at his property, he knew it was finally time to take his business to the next. Main is all on his own, so he's stuck just trying to guard it for now. Shoji looks over at Sasha, a magic item expert and ruin raiding mage who might be a total weirdo, but she's honestly a 1 in a million find for this mission. His eyes lit up as he realized this wasn't just about the money anymore. He had to treat this like a hunt for the perfect person. He stared at this gorgeous girl, wondering if she was secretly a beast or just a total fake. So he stayed on high alert and finally made his choice. He decided it was finally time to quit playing around and get serious. Shoji straight up asked what kind of edge they had with all that research money. Main just stared at him, completely caught off. Sasha realized they had a huge edge since she could supply and fix all their magic gear, but the total cost for all those tools and upgrades hit a massive 2,000 gold coins. That's a massive 20 million yen in Japanese cash. So after thinking it over, Akina finally calls Oguma over, and as the guy reaches out, Oguma walks in. Shogi was totally down and dropped 1,000 gold coins right then and there, promising to pay thousands more once the gear was finished, which had Oguma and Main looking super hyped. Sasha was totally blown away and asked if he was seriously giving up thousands of gold, but he just told her it was no big deal since he can grow restored items whenever he wants. She smirked and told him that throwing around that much cash was a total power move, so Shoji offered to be her patron and fund everything, but only if she agreed to one last condition. Aquinas offered her a job working at his shop as his newest employee. Her duties were to craft magic items for sale and act as his personal bodyguard. He even told her she could use her. The guy told her she had to pass a test first by working as a security guard for a few days, and after thinking it over, Sasha finally agreed. She figured that working at Shoji's shop was way better than raiding ruins for cash, since it finally let her focus all her energy on her research. Sasha shook his hand to seal the deal, asking how she'd get past security, but Shoji just flashed a grin and said he couldn't wait to see her pull it off. A few days pass, and Shoji and Sasha are standing on the road right outside the spooky forest of destruction with their carriage parked behind them. He remembered his co-workers wanted him to scout a nearby village for business and see if Sasha actually had the skills to be their guard. Suddenly, they heard a super creepy noise getting closer and closer. The guy looked over and yelled that they'd finally shown up. He said he'd heard rumors about monsters raiding the village out. A pack of wild horses was charging straight at them, screaming at the top of their lungs. Kana reached out to Sasha and told her he was counting on Sensei. And when she asked if he meant her, he just thought to himself that it was all just a formality. He remembered Sasha was mostly a researcher, so being a decent mage was plenty, and Main tagged along just to be safe. Akina leaned in and asked how powerful those wandering horses were, and Main was definitely starting to feel a bit nervous. She warned that these wandering horses are brutal monsters that stomp their prey flat, and even as C ranks, they're so fast that escaping or catching them is basically impossible. Out in the open like this, these tough B-rank monsters were getting stronger and closing in fast. Shoji realized these monsters were just like the forest bears the hero had already crushed. Sasha didn't even flinch as she stepped up to face the beasts. Akina was finally going to see. She kicks things off by summoning a star-shaped magic circle and announces it's time to show off her research, as a ton of other glowing symbols start popping up all around her. Main ducked behind Akina as the air suddenly turned ice cold, and Sasha just crossed her arms, warning them they were about to freeze solid. She pointed her hands at the horses and summoned a massive ice fountain, merging all her magic circles into one giant ring. The boys were totally hyped watching that insane ice magic freeze the ground. But these horses were actually geniuses, and tried to leap right over the trap at full speed. Sasha says that with Shoji-san's cash, she was able to instantly fix a super old magic item that got trashed during the dig. She lifts her dress and a magic staff drops out, bursting into flames as she grabs it and starts spinning it around. The second she activated her magic item, Iced Darkness Princess, the ground froze over way faster, leaving the horses dazed while Shoji stood there completely shocked by the insane speed. The monsters slammed into the icy ground and couldn't even get back up, screaming their heads off as they were sent packing. Sasha looked super proud and asked the guys what they thought of her fixing the magic item, totally shocked she could already pull off a stunt like that, while the main guy was just blown away. She wasn't done yet, and as she watched the horses try to bolt, she summoned another magic circle and told them running was useless, calling them nothing but little kids. She threw her arms wide and announced the show was over, while the guys started screaming that the air was turning ice cold. Sasha snapped her hands up and a massive amount of magic circles appeared all around her, leaving the guys staring with their jaws on the floor. Sasha fires off her homing ice spell, making sharp frozen arrows spawn right inside the magic circles while Main and Shoji watch closely, and the horses start to freak out. Sasha pointed her hands right at the target and gave the command, sending every single arrow flying straight for the horses. The horses were charging so fast Shoji thought they were bolting, but Main told him to stay focused and look straight ahead. The ice suddenly froze right in front of the speeding horses, sending them crashing down as the boys braced themselves and the animals totally lost it from pure fear. Isaro stabbed through the horses one by one, and even though they let out some painful cries, they were totally finished in seconds. Sasha stood tall with a huge smirk, looking totally proud of what she just pulled off. Shoji remembered Main's warning that fighting out in the open was a total nightmare. She started muttering about how weird it was for these monsters to live here, and why there were so many of them, making him realize she'd totally switched into researcher mode, and that she was actually the legendary Sasha he'd heard about. She turned to Giannis to see if she passed the exam, and he told her she obviously crushed it. She told Sun she was hyped to finally work for him, standing on the hilltop looking absolutely stunning in the glowing sun. Shoji figured the Akina store just landed another pro worker, while Main was totally losing it and freaking out. It's been a week since Sasha started her job, and back at Akina's shop in the capital, Shodya and Main are watching her show off a brand new spell. She pointed her staff and fired off a spell, making a glowing magic circle pop up that had her totally hyped, and while the guys watched in total awe, the orb suddenly started smoking. Sasha admitted she only finished the staff research because Shoji-san paid for it. Then she asked for another 1,000 gold coins and he totally agreed. He was totally shocked she fixed a broken magic item in just one night. But Sasha explained she used a stone to repair the pattern, even though the usage limit was still stuck at 6. She said she wanted to build something even crazier than lost magic, but Main told her it was already perfect, so she stuck her leg out and suggested adding that little bonus to the shop's inventory. The girl pulls out a flashlight and asks if it's magic, and Sasha confirms she used ancient lost tech to make it way more powerful than any normal one. He hesitated like he was about to say something, but she cut him off to announce she'd fixed the fire staff and even made a new product in just 1 week. Sasha clicked the magic lantern on and it lit up, totally blowing the guy's mind. So Main decided to see how it compared to the ones in the city before sending the old one back to the shop in the royal capital. Shoji asks how many they've got, so Sasha flips open her canvas to show 10 more pieces and admits Oguma and the crew helped her out. She explains she's the only one who can fix items that lost their magic, and once she crafts the flashlight's core, the rest is easy, leaving the guys super hyped that the dev team was pumping these out so fast. They headed straight to the village right by the dark forest of destruction to start making deals immediately. Shoji thinks about how this village is way out in the middle of nowhere, with 0 shops and almost no one around. Everyone there works as a guide, and they only figured out what the people needed. An old man walks up, introduces himself as the village elder, and thanks them for taking out those wild horses. Shoji knew horses used to raid this village, but now monsters that should have stayed deep in the forest are suddenly showing up, even though he was told the attacks were over. He looked at the villagers and realized they were still totally on edge, absolutely terrified of the monsters hiding in the pitch-black night. The boy finally admits to the chief that they're actually from Akin's shop, and the old man is totally blown away. Shoji waved toward his cart and told everyone they were just looking to do some trading in the village. The elder promised to make a deal, but then a guy behind him piped up and asked if they brought any rare loot from the city. The guy explains they're just renting a small corner, since he wants to sell the main goods where they're actually in demand, and focus on Sasha's custom lanterns in this village. Since food is super hard to find in this country, they put out the cheap items first, and people were shocked to see the prices were way lower than the big stores in the capital. After getting their basic gear ready, the guy decided it was finally time to start selling those lanterns. But right then, a couple of strangers suddenly showed up. They were actually fellow traders who greeted. Choji asks who the heck they are, but the two merchants just stand up and start giggling. One guy holds up a lantern, saying they're lighting up this dark world, while the other merchant rips the cover off his own and adds that even the trees and plants need that light to grow. The two merchants strike a pose with their lanterns and announce they're the Gregory Magic Lantern Shop. Main warns Shogi-san that this shop is their rival, but Shogi reminds her about those popular lantern shops she showed him in the capital the other day. This lantern seller started making a scene to get everyone's attention, shouting out to the peaceful villagers to come check him out. He grabbed his head and told them they'd run into a monster on the way to the village, and Main was totally blown away by the news. Shuji knew he was lying because they'd already used Sasha's monster protection potion on their way to the village just to be safe. The merchant kept on about how he was just as freaked out as they were, especially since the sun was going down and night was about to hit the village. He totally freaked out the locals by yelling that the monsters were hiding in plain sight, and Shoji couldn't wrap his head around why he was scaring people instead of just selling his stuff. The merchant shows off a brand new Gregory magic lantern and offers to light up the whole village, basically forcing everyone to want one right then and there. Sasha's just chilling with her tea while Shuji realizes they're pulling off a forbidden move, and then Main starts screaming that they need to stop shopping at this sketchy store. The merchants gave them a super weird look and walked over, telling them their shop had magic lanterns too. The second merchant spotted their lanterns and started trash-talking their old-school uniforms, bragging that his own designs were way more stylish, so one of the guys asked if they were actually exactly the same. This merchant starts bragging that he's Professor Gridge, a genius inventor who can build any magic item you can think of. The first merchant jumped in, swearing he'd sell his stuff no matter what, and introducing himself as the manager of the garage store. This shop was a total bloodbath but making insane money all over the world, and you started getting nervous wondering if these guys were just weird or super annoying. The second merchant trashed their lanterns like they were just old horse bones, claiming they looked way too cheap to ever sell. Main wasn't having any of that attitude, so Shogi told them they'd never know for sure until they actually tried to sell it, and Main turned to Sasha-sana to see if the guy was legit. Back in the carriage, Sasha was totally knocked out, and the guy shouted that she was out cold, joking about how she's always napping. She started stressing out because her job is making gear and playing bodyguard, but she honestly doesn't care about anything except her research, while Sasha just stayed fast asleep and kept snoring away. The merchants were totally impressed by how calm and confident the guy was, so after checking out his lantern, they challenged him to a competition right then and there. Main couldn't close the gap. Shoji thought the whole thing was getting pretty hype, and Sasha didn't even wake up. These traders hyped up their lanterns as the ultimate magic tech, swearing they were the brightest things around and worth every penny. So our guy looked them in the eye and accepted their challenge. A massive crowd swarmed around them, yelling that things were finally about to get crazy. It was finally dark in the village, and the chief wanted to see which lantern was better, so he told them to turn them on. Shoji and the merchants set their lanterns on the table to compare. Both lanterns were glowing like crazy, and the local guy shouted that they were both super bright and would totally save them at night, right as Shoji caught a sleepy Sasha letting out a big yawn. They checked the prices, and the merchants told them it would cost exactly 1 gold coin. The guy didn't even flinch when he dropped a price that was straight up massive. He'd already talked it over with Oguma and the crew to settle on that specific number. The traders are already celebrating their victory because if the brightness is the same, everyone's obviously going to go for the cheaper price. Shuji just grinned as they talked about his next move and tried to call Sashi-san, knowing that if 2 flashlights are equally bright, the cheaper price is what really matters. He could have used his skills to mass-produce everything and tank the price, but he kept it high since Sasha's items were way too important for their future plans. He realized these guys were super messy, but their gear was so legit that he didn't mind the extra cost. He knew that even if the price was a bit high, Sasha's magic gear was way too good to ever be replaced. Sasha shook it off and stood up, making Main super relieved. Then she grabbed the lantern and asked Shoji-san to hold her glasses for a second. She skipped this part because it's usually useless, but she hasn't told us everything about this flashlight yet, especially about the secret button at the bottom that does something else entirely. They hit the button to finally see Sasha's secret research, but the lantern light suddenly flickered out, leaving the guys totally clueless about what was coming next. Suddenly, a bright light starts pouring out of the lantern and floods the whole place like it's spilling over. The light blasted through the shadows until everyone was completely surrounded, leaving them standing there with their jaws on the floor, unable to look away. Everything was super flashy and the crowd was swarming them to get some, not even caring that it cost a ton of extra cash. The merchants collapsed in shock while the crowd tore the lanterns to pieces, and as they sat there frozen, Shoji walked up and told them the winner was already a done deal. Sasha flashed a grin and bragged that their magic item was hands down the strongest thing in the world right now. She explained that her new invention actually used super rare ancient tech from a lost era. Plus, it works like a charm for keeping scary monsters far away. But the merchants were absolutely terrified the second they heard. Shoji told them to keep an eye on the guys waving their hands. The villagers definitely needed light, but this lantern did way more than just glow. It actually took away their fear, and the guys realized this was exactly what everyone was searching for. The merchants were totally fuming and bolted out of there, giving up for now, while Shoji, Main, and the rest of the village just watched them run off. The whole village swarmed Sasha to tell her that her invention was the absolute best. And as Shoji watched her acting all smug, he realized she wasn't just obsessed with her research. There was definitely something else going on. Sasha turned away from the hyped-up crowd, saying this basic loot just wasn't good enough for her yet. The morning after the big lantern contest, the guys were finally ready to head out of the village, sitting right next to the scary forest of destruction. Main's busy loading up the cart when Shoji apologizes for the sudden pickup, but Oguma just brushes it off like it's totally fine. He thought back to yesterday and realized Sasha's new invention was actually insane, making Main blush as she admitted she was watching from the background the whole time. She mumbled about trying sales and security, but Shoji was totally lost and had to ask her to repeat herself. Sasha stands right in front of her manager San and promises to handle the security on the way back, but then she asks to go shopping for research, leaving Main looking totally caught off guard. Shoji had other stuff to take care of, so he put Sasha-sana in charge of guarding Oguma and the loot back to the capital, which Main was totally stoked about. They finally made it to the cabin in the woods, but Mayan was acting so sketchy that he had to ask her what was really going on. Main was totally blushing and reminded them she was literally the guard, saying it was super reckless to just leave them alone like that. The guy tried to ditch Main by sending him to grab some water, but he was totally floored when Main headed straight for the field instead. Right before he stepped onto the field, he knew that with Sasha finally on his side, this was the big moment he needed to keep the second part of his deal going. He stepped onto the field to see magic staffs poking out of the dirt everywhere, and he couldn't help but grin because using Sasha's lost magic actually worked to grow some seriously rare loot. He snatched up a magic item and realized it was basically a cheat code for infinite loot, and he was totally hyped. This staff blasts magic with just one click, and Shoji says he's got to try it out himself to make sure it's legit. His eyes snapped to the screen as his field started crackling, making her super nervous, so he bolted outside and spotted some terrifying clawed paws. This massive beast let out a creepy fushu sound, showing off its 6 powerful arms as it loomed over a totally frozen Shoji and stared him right in the eyes. The guy was absolutely losing it, screaming that this thing was a super dangerous monster. He starts looking for Main, but then remembers he sent her for water, so he looks at the magic item in his hand and decides to put it to work. The monster lunges at him with a massive roar, and as Shoji hits the dirt, he frantically slams the button on his magic item. A magic item spawned a glowing circle and totally blasted the spot where the monster was standing. Shuji was hyped that things were finally going his way, and this item made him ready to fight, but the beast didn't care, and kept charging straight for him at .0183. He totally panicked and started spamming the buttons on his magic gear, but the beast was just too quick and dodged every explosion. He kept spamming the button, but the magic item just died on him, and after a second of being confused, he realized the thing finally hit its limit. Shoji tried to bolt, but a root snagged his leg and sent him face-planting, making him curse his luck as he spotted the thing that tripped him. He rooted himself to the spot, knowing this was the big moment, and right as the angry beast closed in, he grabbed a magic staff in each hand. He grabbed 2 magic staffs and started using them both at the same time. Suddenly, a monster bursts out of the smoke while G is totally locked in, mashing those buttons. The monster took a massive swipe at him, but the second he aimed that magic item, the beast went flying back. Shoji looked at the beast he just took down and realized he won without using a sword or any magic at all. Main started pounding on the garden door, shouting to see if he was doing okay. He opens the door and tells Main everything is totally fine, but she's super worried about that loud noise she heard and asks if it's really okay to come in since he told her to stay out of the garden before. Looking at the crispy beast, she realized it was a 6-armed forest demon bear that shreds metal armor and bounces axes off its thick fur, making it a total A-rank nightmare. Shoji stood there feeling like a total boss, knowing he just faced a dangerous beast and actually pulled off the win. Main was totally shocked and asked about Shoji-san, so he explained it was all thanks to a secret fire magic item he'd picked up earlier. She was stoked that Shoji-san's magic bear could wreck that demon, but the boy warned her it was a one-shot deal. She spotted the staff Choji was hiding and mentioned she'd seen it before, so he quickly tried to distract her by offering a taste of that delicious fried demonic bear. Main was totally down because lugging that water made her starving, and while the guy was safe, he had no idea monsters were actually food, or that they'd try to eat him too. They sat across from each other roasting meat over the fire, and as Shoji thought about everything he'd been through, he finally started to realize just how much power he gained by hiring Sasha. He scored magic strong enough to take down wild horses with ease, plus the insane ability to craft perfect magic items in a total flash. Sasha just leveled up their security and trade game, giving them a massive power boost for every fight from here on out. Main cut him off, explaining that most monsters are way too scared to enter a great serpent's nest, so seeing a demonic bear there made absolutely no sense. The kid realized this bear looked totally out of its mind, and it reminded him of those wild horses that had been raiding the village lately. Everything about this was screaming that he was in massive danger. Main and Shoji get back to the shop only to hear some guy apologizing and saying Shoji called him up out of the blue. Muda walked up to the group, and when they asked what went down, he just asked Shoji for some iron, leaving the guy totally confused about what he actually meant. Muda told the kid to find some iron to help everyone out, but Shogi immediately realized this was the perfect chance to make some serious cash. Back with Sasha's love potion, a girl is sitting there holding a bottle when Shoji walks in, just a few days after he totally wrecked that demon bear in the field and the workshop. He stopped by to check on some new product research, but Sasha suddenly looked super sick after taking a sip of something, so he asked her what she just drank. She said it was a brand new potion from a super old recipe she just scored, and even though it wasn't fully finished yet, she decided to give it a shot anyway. Shuji was worried if she'd be okay drinking while she was supposed to be studying, but he could feel the research finally picking up some serious speed. Sasha catches him totally off guard by stripping down, explaining that she made a love potion so powerful that she's losing her mind faster and faster. Shoji got super flustered and tried to bail, but Sasha wasn't staying behind and followed him right out. She pressed right up against his back and whispered that this wild urge to get closer was a pretty cool effect, her heart racing faster by the second, while Shoji just felt super awkward with her chest. Sasha starts messing with his head, telling him things are heating up way too fast, and the guy is so stunned he can't even find the words to respond. Shoji said he could handle it, but Sasha backed off and told him the effect was already gone, making him complain that it ended way too fast. Sasha laughed it off and asked him to team up for the test, but he just told her to stop messing around and do it right next time. Sasha just finished his third magic project, a love potion, but it was way too intense and wore off in a flash, so the manager totally scrapped it. Muda slammed an iron scroll onto the table and asked Shoji if he could hook him up with a ton of iron. Main was super interested in that piece of iron, while the guy mentioned that Muda had suddenly called him up. Even though Muda fled the country, the shopkeeper says he still pops. First, he made sure the guy was okay and saw he actually had backup with him. Muda grabbed a long cigar and kept talking about all those broken mithril swords he brought over, saying he actually had a favor to ask. It turns out the old guy had a ton of weapons to make, but he was totally out of iron. Shoji asked why he needed the iron, and after the old man confirmed his hunch, he realized he'd have to use his cultivation skills to actually get it. The old man shows them a wooden box and says he needs at least 50 more, but the more the better, and they've only got 2 weeks to deliver that same high. Shoji asked for some iron samples since he's clueless about metal, planning to have a partner check the quality while he secretly tries to score a bigger batch to start with. Muda tossed out some iron samples without a second thought, and the kid immediately hit him with another question. He wanted to know why they suddenly needed to crank out a massive pile of weapons out of nowhere. Shogi could tell everything was still a massive secret, and the whole situation felt super fishy, especially since dealing with clients who won't give straight answers is a total nightmare in modern Japan. He calls all the shots at the shop, and if he doesn't like something, he just shuts it down. Now that they're open, he's got a full squad. He put his hand on his chest and agreed to take the case, looking totally hyped to finally face a real challenge. After waving the boys goodbye, Muda gathered the crew at Shoji's shop and told them this was their first huge deal since Akina's shop opened, so they had to go all in together. He says he can score a ton of iron from merchants near the Dark Forest of Destruction, but even if the price is a steal, the capital is way too far to ship it, so he's got to figure out 3 things first. First, they needed carts to haul a ton of iron, then some guards to keep it safe, and finally a city where they could crash on the long trip to the royal capital. Shoji told the delivery squad to get the carts ready, and they were totally down to handle the whole job. He said Main would stay with her while Sasha watched the other carts, but Sasha beat him to it, saying she'd use protective potions to make the whole trip way more comfortable. He already found the perfect city for them to crash in, so the whole squad geared up and hit the road. They hit up a new city and straight up asked for a place to set up a staging area for Akina store. Shodi said he wanted to sell gear from the Akina store since it was a total hit in the capital, and knowing they'd be nervous about strangers, he was glad he came prepared. The locals did a total 180 and said they're way too moody to promise they can fit everyone in. Choji told them not to sweat it since the staff was totally ready, and Main, their trainer, asked if they were hyped to follow her lead and use their muscles to start selling. The staff was actually super thankful for Main's non-stop training, and as their new instructor, she told them they weren't pathetic bugs anymore because they finally survived her lessons and became useful. She screamed that if they're tired, they should take extra days off on top of their paid vacation, and promised they'd still get a solid paycheck. Then, this guy used some famous local. With the shop all set and the crew locked in, Main finally gave the signal and everyone jumped straight into action. The locals swarmed them with all kinds of requests while checking out their gear, and even though some people were being super demanding, the crew was totally ready and had everything they needed in stock. In no time, the shelves were totally empty, and the kids were hyped that they sold every single thing. The locals who let them in started hyping up his shop and the whole crew. Then G asked them what they were planning to do next. They were totally down to let them use the city as a home base for the shop. They even asked them to keep coming back and use it whenever they wanted. Shoji was absolutely hyped and thanked them. Shuji told the squad they did awesome, and it was finally time to get paid. Next up, he just had to grow the iron he grabbed from Muda. Turns out, They start hauling all that iron they gathered right down the road to the royal capital. He's already hooking up all that custom gear he ordered to match the vibe. Muda stared at the perfect iron in total shock, asking how he got way more than he needed in only 5 days. But then he told Shoji he knew he could pull it off all along. Shoji was the only one who knew the truth. That cultivation skill was cranking out power at a scary speed, and it just kept doubling like crazy. Model stared at the high-grade iron and couldn't believe it was the exact quality he asked for. But he quickly realized that how he got his hands on it didn't even matter. The old man went totally silent. Shoji asked him what was going on. He headed inside and explained that a forge is nothing without good materials, and real dwarves take that stuff seriously. Muda asks the kid if he's ever heard of orichalcum, and he instantly remembers it as that legendary material from every fantasy story ever. The guy told the weapon killer that he could actually make a weapon way stronger than mithril using the hardest mineral in the world, and Main was totally locked in. Or maybe the people working with all those minerals just stumbled onto it by accident, and it was a total mystery. Muda looked over the gear he'd built with his own hands, and promised himself he'd forge an even crazier weapon out of Orishaka one day. He swore he'd build a mountain of weapons so tough they'd never break even for a weapon killer. And Main asked if he was actually for real, or maybe they're just gonna need a massive pile of calcium one day. He told Shoji he'd trust him to have his back any day, and once he gets his hands on that orichalcum, he's gotta let him be the one to forge it. Main's eyes were literally sparkling at the sight of that insane orichalcum weapon, and seeing him so hyped made the guy decide he had to find that legendary material for himself one day. He suddenly remembered one last question for Mood, so he headed back to ask why he was forging a mountain of iron into so many weapons. Why would a total master even need to make a whole bunch of weapons? The guy actually had a connection he wanted to introduce who was sitting on a massive stash of iron. He hands him a business card and tells him to head to this address for a job, but he can only take the gig after chatting with a chill dude. The boys pull up to this massive mansion and are totally blown away. But Main points out it's a noble's place, making it hard to believe someone there is actually a target. They're met by a guy who's stoked they finally showed up, and he introduces himself as the master of the house, Count Safid Valvarand. The guy claimed he was just some broke local lord, but Shoji didn't care about his status. He just wanted to finish the job fast and make a ton of money. They stepped into his massive mansion and sat in a super fancy room right across from the nobleman, who was hyped to finally meet Akina and Kun, and thanked them for making the long trip. Shuji realized this guy looked like a total high-class noble. The kid introduces himself as Akina Shogi, and says Main and Sasha are his bodyguards, while the noble guy just rubs his chin and stares them down with a sharp look that makes everyone feel totally Count Feed dropped his head, pressed his hand against the table, and slowly started to stand up. He yelled at the top of his lungs that they were gorgeous, and that he definitely wanted girls that pretty to be his bodyguards. The boys were totally freaked out, but he just casually asked to grab some tea once they finished talking business. He turns to the lady and asks her to grab some tea, and after a super awkward silence, Maine starts freaking out that it's a pickup line while Sasha just rolls her eyes, thinking he's just another new client. She said she had work right after, so it was a no-go, and Sasha told him there was no way she could get past her client's security. The noble made a face and apologized, but he wasn't giving up and asked to meet tomorrow, right before his servant warned him his wife would be totally furious. Count Safid slammed his hand on the table and shouted that it was finally time for the main mission, while Shoji wondered what the deal was and noticed the guy was too chicken to even say a word to his wife. The Count put Shoji in charge of buying weapons, and he made it clear he wanted a massive haul, not just a tiny amount. He saw a massive stash of weapons just like the order called for, but he couldn't figure out why they needed so much firepower. The Count points out a massive dungeon on the map right in his territory, and our guy is totally hyped to dive in for the monsters, loot, and epic boss fights. The cow explained that his land was swarming with adventurers every day hunting for dungeon loot, and Shoji finally realized the whole place had basically become the heart of the dungeon. The Count looked dead serious as he warned that a massive prison break was brewing in the dungeon. The kid totally froze up the moment he heard the words, "Great Escape." Then a strange word popped up. He explains that the Great Escape is basically a massive monster jailbreak, which is super rare since those dungeon beasts usually stay put unless they're starving and breeding like crazy. The kid thought this sounded super dangerous, but the Count said they usually spot the signs early and get ready to shut it down. They had zero time to prep for this huge breakout. Everything went down way too fast and on a massive scale. There were so many red flags popping up everywhere that they just couldn't. Shoji figured those mindless monsters escaping was part of a massive breakout. But what if they were actually just kicked out of another territory? Was everything really as dangerous as he thought? The Count flings open the window and yells that this escape is way bigger and faster than usual, so they're definitely not going to have time to stop it. Count Safedi's knights and hired mercs just weren't enough to hold the line. They were totally running out of food and weapons. As they stood on the balcony looking over This noble believes it's his duty to protect everyone, so he tells Shoji that's exactly why he ordered a massive pile of weapons from the blacksmith Mood-kun. The Count heard about a guy who could supply a massive stash of weapons, so he tested him with an iron order, and that's when everything finally clicked for Shoji. The guy turned to Shoji and asked if there was a weapon a tiny group could use to stop the massive breakout, but he needed to be able to buy a ton of them. Shoji was totally stressed since they literally just met today, especially after he made a crazy deal with the merchant and yelled at Muda for dragging him into such a dangerous mess. Since this guy was ready to pay big money to help people, he decided to make the deal, so he started digging through his bag and asked if he'd want a one-time use magic item. He pulled out a magic staff and bragged that it was a super rare piece of lost magic tech. Sasha was totally shocked to see the staff, but the guy told her to chill because it wasn't hers, and he'd actually gotten it from a different source. Shogi says sorry, but this one-time use magic staff is actually the star of their Akina shop, so the Count asks how it works since it's just a throw. He says anyone can blast fire just by hitting a switch without using any mana, and apparently, landing 6 shots is enough to take out a whole demonic bear. Shoji's partner found a massive stash in some ruins, and says he can deliver 300 staffs in just 5 days for 200 gold each, leaving the Count totally stunned by the scale of the deal. Suddenly, his servant rushed over looking totally stressed, and Kansama asked what the big deal was and why it was getting so loud. He rushed to the Count in a total panic, shouting that the big escape had started, and they'd hit the defense line in just 3 days, way faster than anyone expected. The soldier mentioned a new leader had finally shown up, which totally freaked out the Count, so Shoji asked what this boss was actually like. The Count warns him that the commander doesn't look like a powerful monster, but guns and magic are totally useless against the leader of the beasts. He looked down and explained the staff is for hunting monsters, but since they're low on troops, only the leader can use it, and even then, it won't stand a chance against that guy. He hit up Shoji for 500 staffs and a weapon that was way more powerful than a regular stick. He's got just 3 days to find those 2 items and sell them, and the buyer is ready to pay whatever it takes. Shuji started wondering and asked Sasha if that magic staff was their absolute strongest item, and she told him it was the best they had unless he was secretly working with someone else. The kid knew this noble was being totally reckless, but 100,000 gold coins for just 500 staffs was a massive payday he couldn't pass up, making it his biggest deal yet. Shoji doesn't care about being a hero or some big-shot savior, but he definitely can't stand watching regular people suffer. The Count looked like he was loaded, and since Aiken's shop was brand new, he couldn't pass up a payday this big, so he took the job. The Count was stoked and offered to let them rent some fast monster mounts for 10,000 gold up front, and Shoji thanked him for the hookup. Akina hits the shop and gets straight to work, while Shoji tells Oguma and the gang to round up 30 people from the warehouse and send them to the Count. He told Sasha-sana to watch the group, and had Main protect him until they reached the office, where both of them would then guard the staff being moved. While he's busy growing these staffs, he's actually about to get a weapon that's way stronger than any regular staff. He and Main dove back into that creepy forest of destruction, and the boy just kept spawning more and more staffs. First he had to handle the staves, but he only had 10 ready, and since it would take a full day just to get the other 400, he only had 2 days left to grow them all. To get a weapon way stronger than a staff, he has to grow a ton of them, and since there's no time to think, he just starts making staffs right now. Shuji needed to see exactly how fast he could make things grow by planting those staffs, so he yanked one out early and gripped the ornament on top. He tossed it aside, saying it was way too early again, and decided to get a closer look at the decoration. He'd never actually tried pulling them up before because normal farming usually leaves you with tiny unfinished junk, but this one grew from the top and already looked totally perfect. He stared at the ball and realized it might be the same thing from that story mode just told him. There's this legend about Orichalcum that only shows up when you're dealing with massive piles of materials. He couldn't tell if he just sensed the legendary material or if it popped up on its own, but he definitely remembered this happening with something other than Orichalcum before. He started wondering if he could use his cultivation skill in a weird way with a ton of materials to create something totally new. An hour's gone by, and get this, it's not just a wish. It's a crazy cultivation skill where planting one item makes a whole bunch more grow, which is totally broken. After digging up another one, he saw it was ready for the swap, so he tied it to a branch, stuck it in the ground far away, and then he spotted something. 3 days pass, and the guys finally come face to face with the Count. He reminded everyone they were super close to the first defense dungeon for the big escape. They just got a heads up that a whole pack of monsters is showing up today. The lookout screamed that they were already here, and it was 10 rank A demonic bears charging straight for them. The Count thanked Shoji-kun for the 500 staffs and called him a legend, but he didn't want to waste them, and asked for a weapon that was even crazier. Shoji pulls a half-finished staff out of his bag and says it's the one, and while everyone's doubting him, he reveals it's actually his brand new mana grenade. They race off to see what this thing can really do in a real fight. He tossed the item to Main and told her to chuck it, so while Sasha quickly cast a shield spell, Main was already winding up for the big throw. She chucked the ball at the bears with everything she had, and it zoomed right for them. Everyone held their breath to see what would happen while she just stood there looking totally cool. The blast was so massive and powerful that the guys could only stare with their eyes popping out in shock. Right then, the dying demons let out a horrible scream, but it quickly went quiet until nothing but smoke was left. The Count's jaw hit the floor as he watched 10 demon bears get absolutely fried by the flames. Main was totally blown away and started hyping the guy up, while Sasha just kept it chill and said it was awesome. Shuji explained the new mana grenade again, saying all you gotta do is hit the button, toss it, and watch the big explosion. He remembered testing it in the Forest of Destruction where the new shape caused a massive explosion instead of fire, proving this skill is absolutely insane. The Count was totally hyped because these staffs were way better than he imagined, and since they could finally crush the commander, he asked for the price, which the guy set at 1,000 gold. The guy turned to his cart full of gold and agreed to buy the weapon. The shop workers were super stoked, and Shoji realized these nobles were even richer than he thought, but he knew he was going to sell every single thing he prepared. One of the Count's guys reports that the Central Defense Force has finally arrived, so he orders everyone to the center and tells Shoji-kun to explain the goods to the soldiers. This is the big moment everyone's been waiting for, and the boys are totally ready to pull off their massive escape. Shoji shows the soldiers how to master their magic gear, and they're super hyped to finally get it. The guy asked to watch their weapon crush the escape attempt, and the Count agreed since having an expert there for such a massive showdown was a total win. Back at Akina's shop, it was finally time to handle business, since this place was officially their main camp. He says the twisty road leading out of the dungeon is packed with layers of defenses, and if they try to fight through every single one, they're basically toast. The Counts of Feed showed them the dungeon and warned them that the enemies inside were way more dangerous than the ones they usually face. The Count's sentry warned that a massive army was coming, and suddenly, a ton of angry eyes started staring out from the dark dungeon. The shop guys watched the whole thing go down as those monsters finally crawled out of the dungeon and showed their faces. A bunch of glowing eyes popped out of the shadows, and as all these crazy monsters stepped into the light, you realized this was the ultimate great escape. Main was totally freaked out by their massive numbers. Sasha said the books never mentioned an army this big, and Shoji warned it was way too dangerous, so the Count used wind magic to link up with every squad. He totally caught Choji off guard by calling him away, and then he started climbing the ladder onto that wooden box. He climbed up, stood right in front of that massive army, and told everyone to listen up as he introduced himself as Safid Valva Rand, the Lord of the Rened territory. He stood up and asked if they'd seen the massive prison break happening at a totally insane speed, especially since Modu and Kun were barely getting any of the iron weapons they were promised. While he struggled to catch on, the man warned him that if things went south, this whole underground city would burn to the ground. He loaded up on a ton of crazy strong gear from the Aquinas shops, so now the whole squad knows they're totally ready to win. Everyone knew he was already married, but the second he saw a beautiful girl, he asked her out to dinner, leaving the guys at the shop totally speechless. The Count finished his speech by saying he wanted everything he loved, so he came to grow the town and its business, but he also made it clear he's super happy with what he's got. The knights started shouting their heads off, telling him they loved him and were totally gonna win to make him a ton of money. The Count promised to hook them up with a huge reward just for joining the fight, and the more monsters they take down, the bigger their payday gets. The bigger the prize, the harder they'd fight, and after he hyped them up, his soldiers were totally ready for war. Shoji was totally shocked to find a noble who didn't keep all the cash for himself, realizing this guy was a real teammate who just wanted the whole squad to get rich and be happy together. He was basically a clone of the owner, and since they both cared about the exact same things at the shop, Shoji started getting a really weird vibe. The Count finally gave the signal for his army to charge, and Shoji was hyped to see every trick Rand was hiding. With all the troops in position, the Count finally gave the signal to kick off the first phase of the plan. The Magic Staff Squad steps right up to the front line. They gripped their magic staffs and waited for the signal, and as soon as they got the word, the whole front line started blasting the monsters right in front of them. The kid was totally shocked they were actually fighting with staffs. But then the lookout shouted that the first wave of the escape was finally losing steam and scattering, making the Count super hyped about the news. Now it was the ground team's turn to jump in and stop them. They sliced through every monster trying to sneak past the sides and totally crushed it. But then a second wave showed up, and the kid was totally shocked seeing them use staffs to weaken the monsters, reroute small groups, and let the soldiers jump in for the kill. The Count really knew how to make the most of his. The Count kept barking orders to the second and third squads, and the shopboy honestly thought they could keep this momentum going forever. This insane noise starts booming from the dungeon, and then a massive, terrifying monster walks out with a whole pack of smaller ones, and you can tell just by looking at your face that you're totally. The little monsters were making a huge scene while the kids watched in total awe. But then 3 massive bulls stepped out from behind them, scraping the ground as they moved in. The soldiers on the ground tried to strike, but the bulls were way too fast and dodged every single attack. Everyone was losing their minds because this seemed impossible. But Main explained that even though the iron bull was solid, it was moving way too fast and pushing way past its limits. The lookout spots something else creeping up from behind, but that's impossible since this is a death march where monsters just walk until they drop dead, so why are they acting like this? Suddenly, this massive giant crawled out of the dungeon, way bigger than the rest, and it was standing right behind everyone. Everyone knew right away that this guy was the boss, and with one massive roar, he pushed those iron bulls way past their limits to start the march of death. The kid finally realized the leader was actually a high-level monster bossing everyone else around, and he watched in shock as this beast personally turned their escape into a total death march. The lookout saw the death march pouring through the hole the iron bulls smashed, and right at the front were the villagers who couldn't escape, making the Count totally freak out. It seemed like they'd been out hunting and totally missed the warning, but Main was losing it because one girl wrecked her leg trying to run, and the Count was demanding to know how this. Those iron bulls are charging so fast they're snapping the soldiers' weapons like twigs, and with the death march breaking through everywhere, the enemy is about to storm right into the city. The Count didn't even flinch, telling the guy to save his grenades for the leader because there's always a way to turn things around. The iron bull spotted the defenseless villagers and switched his target, making the Count scream that they had to act right this second. He started panicking and smacked himself in the face, yelling about how the leader's power was way off the charts and that they'd totally failed, all while his mind raced to find a way to fix this mess. Main called for Shoji-san, but as he looked at the Count, he realized he'd finally found a noble he could actually trust. He knew that to succeed in business, he needed. The shopkeeper wanted to help anyone who shared his vision, so he decided it was finally time to show off the insane power of Akin's store. He gave Main the signal, and she instantly charged in to help the soldiers take down the monsters and save the people. Main stuck close to the injured villagers to keep them safe. The knights were totally confused by the massive group charging forward. They couldn't believe it when they found out this brave guy was Shoji turned to Sashi-san and asked if her magic could actually shut those monsters down. She said she could handle one spot, but she didn't have the magic gear to cover everywhere at once, and it was obvious Main didn't have anything either. The guy starts poking Sasha with magic staffs, telling her to remember that magic items work way differently when they're in a weird state. Shoji figured out that cutting it or swapping the parts around changes everything, and he only knows this because he actually cracked open a mana grenade. Sasha mentioned she'd actually read about this legendary lost magic in some old books before. Most people think the magic stone does all the work, but it's actually the parts around it that decide what the item can do and where the real power comes from. If he uses the same magic items side by side, their powers will clash and cause a reaction that's totally different from what they're supposed to do. She shows them how it's done, making the massive combined staff sparkle with light. She aimed her upgraded staff at the iron bowls and totally blocked their path forward. The kelp was totally shocked by that wall of fire, and the lookout couldn't believe they figured out that trick so fast. But Sasha just said it was all thanks to Shoji-san's advice. That massive iron bull skidded to a dead stop. The Count ordered every squad to learn the new move, since taking out those iron bulls would leave the enemy totally defenseless, and Shode gave the signal that everything was good to go. He said Aiken's shop sells iron in bulk, so Maud is the one forging the weapons they haul away on those carts. They hauled them all away in a bunch of different carts. Mo said it took forever because of the massive order, but he finally finished all 2,000 weapons and just showed up. The Count was finally back in a good mood after seeing Maud-kun, and he was super stoked that the Aiken shop helped him get around. He spots a guard kicking monsters out of the way while the crew reveals the sorceress just invented a genius new way for the transport squad and their manager to use magic items. They flip the script in a heartbeat, proving Akina's shop does way more than just sell gear, especially since Shoji says they don't want their customers dying the second they walk out. Main swung her massive sword, hacking right through the monsters. Sasha blasted them with magic while the Count's soldiers kept up the fight. But now, the real work was about to start. The soldiers were going wild with joy, but Shoji stayed totally calm and decided to take out the small fry first. While the girls are still brawling, the monster boss suddenly reaches out to grab the cave, and everyone starts screaming for him to finally show his face. The lookout told the Count that Akin's shop crew totally turned things around, and the Count was hyped to hear it. With the weaklings out of the way, it's finally time for the big boss, and the scout says he's already here. She's already grabbing the cave walls with both hands to pull herself out, and while everyone is losing it trying to figure out what this thing is, the Count identifies it as a high-ranking. Out of every single troll, this guy was easily the strongest. Once he was finally out of the dungeon, the soldier told him that monster was actually an arch-troll. This arch-troll heals so fast that it's basically a walking immortal disaster. It shrugs off small attacks like they're nothing. Even the history books say this thing can survive massive ritual magic. Shoji could tell things were getting super weird, and right as he reached the front, the Count suddenly told everyone to pull back. The monster slammed its fist down right where the first squad was standing. The boys were totally freaked out because the Count called him a massive giant, just like the beast hiding in the deepest part of the dungeon. Main rushes back and immediately asks if Shuji-san is okay. But after a soldier tells the Count their fire staffs and iron weapons are totally useless, he orders them to start using mines and grenades. Another soldier reports that the front lines are cleared and everyone's got mana grenades, but they still can't even get near the guy. They thought they were totally stuck, but Shoji and his crew reminded Count Rand that their service was far from over. The dude asked Main if she could chuck a mana grenade high enough to hit the arch-troll, so she grabbed it and told him she was totally on it. The Count was super curious about what was behind her, and the soldier told him it was there even though those two canyons are actually miles apart. Main clicked the mana grenade to life and chucked it with all her might, totally catching the Count off guard. A grenade slams into the arch-troll and a massive explosion goes off right in our faces. Right after the blast, a crazy thick fog rolled in and you couldn't see a single thing. As the fog finally cleared, they saw the troll was burnt to a crisp, and the guys were sure they'd already won. Suddenly, the troll's skin starts making this crazy cracking sound, and the boys are totally losing it. That crack gets bigger and bigger until it spreads across his whole body. They think he's... The arch-troll actually woke back up, and Main couldn't believe he survived that direct hit, while the Count was totally stunned by his insane will to live. He looked like he was totally mocking them as he sprinted right up to the soldiers and just waved his hand. He's absolutely wrecking everything in his path, and the Count is totally losing it because if those mana grenades don't work, they're finished. So he screams at Main-kun to keep them coming while Main starts chucking them as fast as he can. Cracks kept spreading all over the monster's body, and the heroes were totally stunned by what they were seeing. The goblin peeled off his skin again while keeping that creepy grin. Then his eyes suddenly lit up and he flashed a wicked smile. Our heroes were staring in total shock, unable to believe what they were seeing. The Count collapsed to the floor in total despair, admitting they were out of options and his whole kingdom was finished. Our guy just stared the Count down, his mind already racing with a plan. He only had one plan, and if it failed, it was game over, so he had to decide if he was really ready to risk it all. Shoji realized things weren't like that at all, and he knew there was absolutely no time to start doubting himself now. Since they're totally out of ideas, he tells everyone he's actually got a way to take this beast down. Then Shoji tells Main to hold on to her manga grenades for now, leaving the... Shoji smirked and said if this hit lands, the damage will be so brutal he won't be getting back up anytime soon, leaving the Count totally shook and stuttering. Wait, is that even possible? He pointed to the side and said they had to finish evacuating the soldiers first. Then he asked his team to hand back the manga grenades, and the Count totally agreed. He yelled for his guys to bring Muda out, and soon Muda came galloping up on a horse, asking Shoji if it was really his turn to step up. Shoji turns to the guy and asks for 2 massive barrels right then and there, and while Muda double-checks the request, the man asks if he's actually serious about winning. Suddenly, the guy uses his skill to spawn a bunch of barrels, leaving the Count totally stunned, while Mood just tells him he can build the Shoji screens later if it's really a... He starts crafting barrels because Muta says he can turn them into supplies using the tools he always keeps on him. The barrels were finally finished, and man, they looked absolutely incredible. Muta had whipped up these top-tier barrels so fast that the Count was totally blown away by his skills, and he immediately... Shuji tells Main to pack these barrels with grenades, but she says this is only the beginning since he ruined a whole batch of mana grenades by picking them way too early. He tells her to stuff everything into the barrels, including the mana grenades, then just flip the switch and slam the lid shut. It didn't take long before everything was finally set and ready to go. Choji realized making it was basically like crafting a ground grenade, and since he's used up every mana bomb he had, it's game over if this fails. She nodded, totally getting the plan. Shoji turned the grenades into raw gunpowder and used their mana as a fuse. It was a simple trick, but the explosion was going to be massive. She told Main to hurl those barrels at the arch-troll, and even though they were way heavier than the logs she threw earlier, Main was totally down. She just wasn't sure. Shoji asks Sasha if she can steer the barrel with her magic. She promises it'll hit the mark, and he tells her to keep their shields ready too. He flipped the switch and told Main to start chucking those barrels. She snatched up 2 barrels at once and chucked them aside with a loud creak, leaving everyone totally stunned. She chucks these massive barrels and they fly right at the arch-troll. Shoji looks over at Sasha, and she instantly triggers the magic seal and lets the guide feathers fly. Out of nowhere, those barrels were dangling right over the arch-troll, and everyone's jaws just hit the floor. Suddenly, those barrels blow up right in the troll's face. Suddenly, a massive explosion rips through the entire place. Sasha throws up a magic shield just in time to save everyone from the blast. A massive footprint was the only thing left where the troll used to be. The knight shouted that the big boss was officially taken down. Right then, the Count told everyone it was time to wipe out the... Everyone went absolutely wild celebrating the big win. The next day, the party moves over to Count Renda's huge mansion. Everyone there is having a total blast. The Count even tells the whole crowd to raise a glass for Akins. A bit later, the Count tells Choji that this escape was full of crazy surprises, but they only made it out alive because Choji stepped up. He shows off a massive pile of treasure chests and says it's a huge thank you, so he wants everyone to take it. He looks at the stunning guards Muda and Kun, plus Akina and Shoji, and asks them to join his crew, but Shoji just smiles and turns him down, so the Count sighs and says he gets it. He lets the guy in on the next job, promising some huge tips about a race looking for a pro merchant, so Shoji takes a second to think before asking for more info. The Count explained he was talking about the beautiful elves, and everyone was totally blown away when they heard the news. Shoji asks if they're gonna trade with the elves, and while the Count can't spill the beans right here, he tells him to meet in his office because it's a deal he definitely shouldn't miss. He told them trading with the elves was their best shot at a better, safer life. See, there were a ton of weird things about this great escape. So, he started. They found monster bait incense hidden all over the lower floors, proving someone triggered that massive breakout on purpose, but nobody knows who's behind it or what they're actually planning. If the guy who spread the incense knew who they were, he'd see them as major threats, the same heroes who stopped the big escape. If the mastermind behind the escape doesn't plan on sticking around, he probably won't even bother targeting another country. The elves are hunting for a merchant who can ship massive amounts of high-tech gear they've never even seen before, and since he knows there's a huge payday waiting, he steps up to make a recommendation. So he wishes Aiken's shop the best of luck, and they head straight for the land of the elves. Sho finally made the big move to start trading with the Kingdom of the Elves. The girls were totally hyped and agreed to the plan. Muda decided to tag along, and the man even promised to be the boys' very own personal blacksmith. Moodle was super hyped because the land of the elves was loaded with rare loot. If he joins their squad, they're about to do something totally wild. Out of nowhere, Sasha asks where they even found all those staffs. Mudo's jaw dropped and he said he wanted in, but Main stepped in and told everyone to pipe down. Sasha suggests using contract magic to make sure this deal is totally unbreakable. Once you sign a magic contract, your secrets are locked down and you're totally safe. Main was totally hyped and said she really wanted to learn more about Shoji. He's desperate to be more helpful to the kid, and Shoji finally realizes he can use everyone's power to make it happen. Everyone's totally on board, so they decide to buy a magic contract to make sure nobody spills their secrets. The guy was seriously thankful for everything they did for him. Once the contracts were finally finished, Sasha asked Shoji why he'd been hiding his secret, and he actually agreed to tell her. When they ask him what his secret is, he just tells them his hidden base is deep in the woods. The whole squad didn't even hesitate and started heading there right away. Shoji screams at the top of his lungs for them to wait up. They finally make it back to the house, and that's when everyone discovers the big secret behind his hidden stash. Shogi swings the door open to show off his secret item farm, and everyone is totally blown away. The whole squad looked around, totally blown away by everything they saw. Everyone thought it was totally insane, but Shoji just said it was all thanks to his cultivation skill. Now everyone finally got why Shoji had to keep his big secret under wraps. He knew this secret was way too much for the others to handle. Sasha and Muda were totally pumped, saying these items were one of a kind, with Sasha doing the digging and Muda forging the weapons and armor. Main thought his cultivation helped him handle her debt, but Shoji was the one who actually chose to step up and save her. The next morning rolls around and you're already waking Mura up. He told them he used his skill to make a brand new product to sell in the Elven country. Muda says he's actually got some history with the land of elves. So this guy actually knows a thing or two about them. This place is a total nature paradise that's famous for its healing herbs and spices, and they make sure to keep their distance from the human world. Just like the Count said, they're always hunting for cool tech they don't have, and looking to grab anyone with special skills. He locked his sights right on the guy's carriage. In the land of the nature-loving elves, the roads are a mess of roots that make traveling a total nightmare, but they can upgrade the cart to handle the rough terrain like a pro. Muda's plan was to build one circular saw, clone it a bunch of times, and then rig them all onto the carriage. Maud was dying to try this out, so he told Shoji to hurry up and get to work. Main reminded them that in the land of elves, nature is a huge deal, so you're strictly forbidden from cutting any roots. Plus, having that many blades around is a total nightmare for the horses. Muda was actually all for it, but Shoji figured he just missed the obvious catch. Shuji was totally down to upgrade the cart so it could handle those bumpy dirt roads like a pro. He decides to switch things up and use some earth tech. He thought a cart like that would be awesome, so he asked the blacksmith if he'd ever heard of a suspension system. It's a suspension system from his homeworld, and the blacksmith is totally obsessed with how it works. The very next morning, Moda manages to build Shoji's crazy machine all over again. He was so hyped that he rebuilt the whole machine right then and there. He was struggling with the materials, but the witch stepped in to help him out. They finished modding the cart and immediately took it out for a spin. Shoji said the whole thing turned out totally epic. He says there's way more where that came from, so Muda opens a workshop to mod carriages while Shoji gets busy planting the finished goods. She straight up said that guys are always going to be nothing but big kids. They spent the next few days totally pimping out their ride. They pull a total shocker by showing off how they finished the whole thing way faster than anyone expected. This all went down because Muda found a super fast way to change it up. Muda was totally over it after seeing them rebuild that fancy carriage all over again. The witch just told him straight up that he didn't get a single second of sleep last night. She told Main to get Muda out of the way. The very next day, these massive roots carrying a ton of carts just burst straight out of the earth. Everyone's jaws dropped as Muda told Shogi he still had no clue how strong he actually was. With the kid being such a powerhouse, Nude finally has the time he needs to build way more carts. So, they finally decide to take this cart for a test drive. Everyone was obsessed with the new design, and that lantern meant they were finally safe even in the middle of the night. Muda and Shoji were feeling like total bosses and were super proud of what they just did. Finally, all the stuff we're selling in the land of the elves is officially ready to go. It doesn't take long for our crew to finally pull up to the land of the elves. They spotted these weird roots on the road and were totally confused why they were actually bleeding. 30 minutes before all this, someone actually yelled out to the heroes, but they didn't even bother to look back. They were still geeking out over how cool the cart was when they spotted a gate right in front of them. Our crew finally pulls up to the legendary land of the elves. The heroes were totally blown away by how gorgeous everything looked. Main couldn't stop talking about how awesome it was. Sho even admitted the place was way more high-tech than he expected. The roots in the dirt are a total mess since they're all different sizes, making the ground super bumpy. But that's just their normal life now. Once they realize how handy this cart is, they're totally gonna buy it, and he also spotted that only some of these roots are actually leaking liquid. Out of nowhere, the elf turns to the boys and asks if they've seriously never seen this liquid before. You offered to try his food, but it turned out to be way spicier than you expected. The ground is totally trashed, and now all this nasty poison is leaking right out of the roots. These roots have always been all over the road, but about 5 years ago, this weird liquid just started leaking out of them. And the crazy part is, nobody has any clue what's... The elf said it was fine for drinking and just made food spicy, but that liquid was actually wrecking their cartwheels super fast. Shoji figured he was all set with his food and supplies, but things were still gonna be a total struggle. Out of nowhere, a girl in elfin glasses walks up to the guy and tells them to follow her because someone is calling for them. They finally run into the elf who's been spamming them with calls non-stop, and he claims he just wants to ask a few questions, revealing himself as the powerful Baron of Ard. His friends knew it was him the second they heard his voice. He was totally shocked at how this carriage handled the rough ground. It glided over the bumps like butter, and the wheels seemed... The Baron was actually the guy in charge of fixing the roads, so he was totally obsessed with that cart. Shoji explained that this carriage is their brand new model built specifically for the elf country's bumpy roads, so the elf told them to show it off tomorrow. He's actually picking up a second cart from another shop because he wants to see them go head-to-head. He said the winner would get paid big time to show their craftsmen the secret to making these cards. Shoji saw a perfect opening and was totally down for it. Sasha told the guy he was acting super weird, and then asked if he'd help her out. The very next day, they spent every second gearing up for the big tournament. The Aquinas store was going head-to-head against their massive rivals, the Grigori store. Shoji really wants to score a lantern from their sale. Grigori finally decided to tell everyone the deal with his cart. The Grigori shop just showed off their brand new cart, and it's super light but tough as nails thanks to some crazy woodworking tech. The coolest part is this new magic item they made that totally soaks up every hit. The wheels are covered in paint to stop any liquids from leaking out and messing up the road. Shogi finally reveals their carriage, and it's made of mithril, which makes it super light but crazy strong. The elves realized that much mithril would cost way too much, plus they found a magic lantern sitting in the cart. These wheels are packed with special suspension tech that soaks up every single hit. Even the wheels are made from monster parts, so they're super bouncy and won't soak up any liquid. Out of nowhere, Sasha cuts them off and says that's not even the whole story. She told them they should just hop in a cart and ride it right over the roots. Out of nowhere, the root sprayer kicked in and all that liquid totally vanished. She finally showed off the insane sprayer tech she'd been working on. Shuji realized this was Sasha's plan from yesterday, and she's always got tons of potions on her. The catch is that the drug wears off the plants super fast. Shogi figured that sending a bunch of spray carts across the whole country would finally fix their problems. Shuji says this is a brand new type of carriage straight from Aiken's shop. The shop totally crushed the competition, and the elf count was so hyped he wanted to sign the contract right then and there. A bit later they bumped into Muta and he told them he was busy mastering a brand new move. Sasha asked the guy if he knew any elves who could check out the weird liquid leaking from the roots. Muta mentioned a totally wacky sage from the elven forest named Furu, and Shuji couldn't help but wonder about this weird lady. Right by a couple of small wooden shacks, our dark-haired hero is asking around for a weird sage named Furu, while Sasha wonders if this guy can fix their dying soil, and the old man just strokes his beard and says it's definitely possible. He dropped the news that Furu was actually an elf. He'd run into her one day while he was out looking for blacksmithing supplies. He said she's a total... The dark-haired girl listened closely and figured this elf probably had some super secret info. Our main girl was hyped and said she really needed to meet her. The guy told her it wasn't. He put his hand to his face, totally locked in thought. He realized this was probably the big issue bothering everyone. Plus, he was already planning to grow his shop by building some epic new carriages. The guy looked up with total confidence and said that if they wanted to start a business here, they had to figure out what was wrong with the soil first. He suggested they go find this Elforia person, and the whole crew was totally down for it right away. This elven forest is absolutely massive, and the trees are so packed together that from the sky it looks like one giant plant. The four heroes were trekking through the woods when one of them finally spoke up, saying the elf had to be living somewhere close by. The man starts screaming the elf's name, but the forest stays dead silent, making him think that maybe nobody's actually home. Suddenly, the plants behind them started rustling as a massive stalk with a giant bud shot up and loomed over the four heroes, making them scream in total shock. The short girl yanked a sword from behind her back looking totally confused, so the dark-haired girl suggested someone was using magic to control the plants. The flowers stopped right in front of the four heroes, and as they waited, the buds slowly bloomed to reveal a tiny elf that looked kind of like a kid. She introduced herself as Furia and asked why they showed up, tilting her head at the uninvited guests before turning to face Maud and the rest of the group. The three of them were totally shocked when the guy cleared his throat and said hey, mentioning how many long years had passed since they last saw each other. The elf was still chilling in her flower bud right above the heroes, asking why a guy who only cares about blacksmithing showed up. But the hero told her they were actually there for something way different. A tall, dark-haired girl jumps into the convo to explain the one thing they're avoiding. The country's soil is totally trashed, which is why they're stuck eating nothing but. She warned him that she'd know the second he tried to hide something, which made the elf super suspicious about why a human was even asking, so the guy finally cracked and spilled the beans about what. Furu was totally shocked by the guy's story and shouted that the dark-haired girl actually made a medicine for plant roots, which the elf thought was completely impossible. So, this girl claims she's an expert on lost magic and used it to clear the pollution, but it was only a temporary fix. Then the guy jumps in, saying they're gonna use this potion to grow their business, and they want to know if Ya has any info on the soil problem. Boudreaux is lurking way above the heroes in the dark with his evil eyes glowing, and the elf screams that she found 2 secrets about the soil, but she's definitely not telling them for free. The guy was totally shocked and asked why she was keeping it a secret, but she told him that spilling the beans would totally ruin her top-secret research. Our hero asks what kind of crazy research they're even doing. Fear starts talking in this super creepy voice. She looks absolutely terrifying right now. Our guy is totally freaked out. But that wasn't it at all, because the elf was actually just geeking out over her candy research with a huge blush and literal hearts in her eyes. The 4 heroes were totally stunned, staring with wide eyes and no clue what was going on as the elf threw her arms out and started talking about candy. Walking across the flower, she explains that candy is her literal lifesaver, and that sweets are the ultimate symbol of joy that'll save the entire world. She soared high into the air with a massive grin and shouted at the top of her lungs that she totally loves sweets. She drops down and explains that she used to make sweets from plants, but since her country only grows spicy stuff now, she's working 24/7 to fix it and thinks She stood up with a wide stance and her arms out, telling the heroes she'd give them the info if they met her conditions. Then she laid out the rules. The elf demanded they bring her. The heroes just stood there with their jaws dropped, and the young guy was so freaked out he actually started screaming. The guy asks if she'll finally trust them if they follow her lead, and she basically says anyone who makes fire sweets can't be a bad person. She's also totally over eating those gross, long-lasting imported sugars, and while the guy thinks her logic is pretty sweet, he still feels like something is totally off. The rest of the heroes started chatting about the local food, and when the blonde girl complained it was way too spicy, the tall girl with dark hair and the dwarf totally agreed. He realized they totally needed this, so he bragged that he had it all figured out, and would get a sweet treat from Kino's shop that would make the elf go crazy with happiness. They headed back to their tiny home and started cooking. The leader just stood by the table with his hands folded. Meanwhile, the girls were busy in the kitchen wearing super cute maid outfits. He racked his brain for the perfect treats to blow the elf's mind, then headed over to talk to the Baron about the drama at the wagon factory. This messy-haired elf sipping his drink was totally shocked when he heard the name Furia, but as he asked what was going on, our hero accidentally called him an old lady. The dark-haired guy confirms everything and asks about the country's soil problems, saying it would be a total win for him. One line out. Preserve the sequence exactly. If the input is 1. After the words were spoken, the phone guy lied about Furious age. 2. The hero blurted out that even the tea is spicy in this elf land and asked for some milk, but the elf told him they were totally out of the fresh stuff. The Baron says elves are totally obsessed with dairy. It helped them handle the super spicy food that was popular back then. They'd chug fresh milk or mix it right into their tea. The guy, Aquino thought back to everything elf said and realized the guy was actually onto something good. He sat in the carriage with a huge smirk, ready to show Fioryu the true power of his shop, while back in the elven forest, those same 4 heroes stood guard outside the bud. She gave the heroes a sneaky look, complaining she was totally over all the spicy food she'd eaten, and demanding the guy show her the sweet stuff he brought. The blonde girl and the elf were holding a wooden box, and it was actually filled with that exact dessert for Furio. They cracked open the box to find a white dessert inside, but as Furia added some white foam, she was totally caught off guard by how freezing cold the box felt. Moad built this special ice box, Sasha filled it with her own magic ice, and now the elf was walking right up to grab the dessert. Foria asked what this sweet treat was, and when the hero told her it was whipped cream, the elf was totally blown away that she'd never heard of it before. She shut her eyes and took a big sniff, realizing the treat smelled like super sweet milk. She scooped through the number 10 with her spoon and was shocked by how fluffy it felt. Then she lifted it up and shoved the whole thing in her mouth. A moment later, her eyes pop with excitement as she stands up tall and yells that the dessert literally melted the second it hit her tongue. Her eyes are literally glowing, and her face is bright red as she tries to talk while the dessert melts, feeling that sweet, creamy flavor take over her entire body. Furia felt a wave of sweetness and told the heroes she'd pay them back for all their hard work, while the guys just watched her with huge grins on their faces. You were totally on cloud 9 because that dessert tasted absolutely insane. Milk is super rare in this world because they don't have the tech to kill the bacteria in it. But the 4 heroes actually fixed that by tweaking Sasha's antidote potion to disinfect the milk. Forget a centrifuge. They used a massive wheel to spin that dessert at insane speeds. Then they pulled out the whipped cream, added honey, and frothed it up all over again. The heroes whipped up some legendary cream this world had never seen, and Foryu was so hyped she tackled Akino to the ground, screaming about how the sweetness was a total game changer. Main and Sasha were totally caught off guard, with Sasha looking shocked, and Main turning bright red as she rushed over to the couple, yelling that Furious should have just told them what they needed to know. After a bit, the heroes finally took a seat and the group of 4 locked in, ready to hear whatever wild stuff you were about to tell them. She spoke up first, holding up 2 fingers and looking dead serious as she told him she knew exactly 2 things. The elves told Akino that the roots started leaking some weird liquid a few years back, making all their food taste super spicy, but he was totally shocked to learn the soil had actually been poisoned way longer. She held up a finger to get everyone's attention and told them they just found some weird liquid that looks like root sap in a mine near the forest. The elf pointed out that this spot was just solid rock with 0 roots, and the 4 heroes were totally shook to find out the infection started way earlier, and that rootless liquid was actually real. The hero asks why they're being so secretive, and Firyu explains that the pollution might be man-made, so she doesn't want to tip off the bad guy by making a scene. The hero asks if Fiori is even allowed to spill these secrets, but she just says their sweets were so good they made her scream, and now she wants a front row seat to watch them. The hero was totally confused, but then the elf pointed a thumb at herself and announced she was joining the team. He stood up and asked what he really meant by joining their squad, and the girl just gave him a sweet smile. Sasha leaped to her feet, dying to hear all the details about the soil Fuyu was bringing. Elf Toe was totally down and said this was the exact reason she was joining their squad. Vario was the first to jump in, swearing that the concussion earlier was actually the real deal. She uses spirit magic to chat with plants and get all the secret info. She explained that she's using her powers to figure out why the soil is getting poisoned. She even talked to... She said that even back then, the deepest parts of the earth were already totally poisoned. Pure Yus got super serious and explained that the deep ground in the forest aren't even older than you, meaning those poisoned layers are actually from way back in ancient times. Once the elf heard the news, she mentioned how crazy old these layers actually are, and it really got the keynote thinking. Main asked what happened to the mines, and Fuhr explained that she got totally hooked on the land itself, so she started exploring the Rocky Mountains where plants can't even survive. She tells them about an old abandoned mine nearby where they found some gross liquid that's just like the poison in the roots, and Aquino starts shouting about a spot where the roots haven. The elf starts explaining this nasty pollution deep underground, and that weird liquid found at the mine, and even though she hasn't connected the dots yet, she's heading back in every single day to investigate. Then the guy asks what any of this has to do with joining their squad. Leaning on her hand, Feryu explains that her country used to have this legendary sweet sculpture, and she's determined to bring it back. She blurted out that she couldn't keep his secret alone, so she teamed up with the heroes and their crazy carriage to solve the problem, mostly because they promised her all the whipped cream she could eat. He was a bit confused, but he got the point and told her to keep the business going so she could eat as much as she wanted. The kid explains how much they'd help out as teammates, making the elf close her eyes and give a super proud smile. She straight up asked him about her power to talk to plants, but the guy just stayed quiet and gave her a super confused look. She told them she actually just used her power to talk to the herbs on the whipped cream a bit ago. She spilled everything the plants told her, explaining how some crazy force multiplied them all just for her. She kept going on about what the plants told her, saying the boy could grow literally anything, and that his power was actually super rare and insane. The heroes were totally shocked by how things went down. The guy got all nervous and said it was a top-secret business thing only his crew could know. Sasha even jumped in, saying they were linked by magic so nobody could accidentally spill the beans. Fiore revealed she's also under a magical contract to prove she's totally serious about joining the squad. And then she started listing all the awesome perks she brings to the team. She made her decision based on what the 4 heroes were doing, with Aquino calling the shots, Main on the front lines, Sasha making the gear, and the old elf watching their backs. The elf told Aquino that while his balance was solid, he really needed to get way stronger, leaving the guy standing there completely stunned. She threw her arms out and yelled that she'd be their backup, using her crazy strength to fix every single weakness in the 4 heroes' skills. The guy was blown away by how much the elf knew, but she wasn't done yet, and warned him that monsters were also hiding out in the abandoned mines. She looked over the paperwork and told them she only helped with the investigation to get her entrance exam, then asked the other heroes if they were actually on board with her plan. The old man was totally down to check out the mine since it was right next to gnome territory, and he was dying to figure out that weird liquid so he could level up his blacksmithing with. Sasha was actually totally down with the plan since it meant they could finally solve the soil mystery and level up the shop. Plus, having an elf around is perfect for researching lost magic, so she decided they. Then the last girl in the group spoke up with a massive smile, telling the guys she finally got promoted to a real adventurer and was hyped to get even stronger so she could keep Aquino safe. She told Fiore she'd be hyped to see them get stronger. Then she turned bright red as the rest of the group started teasing her. Aquino rubbed his chin and started thinking hard, knowing he had to seriously beef up the shop to handle the new business and whatever mystery threats were coming his way. This cultivation skill is super cool, but waiting a whole night for a harvest and needing a field to plant in are some major weak spots. He looked at Furuya again and asked how to fix the vocal hero's big weakness, and she just gave him a super confident, serious look, while our main guy closed his eyes and smiled. The leader stepped up and announced he'd personally run the elf's entrance exam, telling everyone to watch closely to see what she was really capable of, and even though the crowd was shocked. Massive mountains lined the horizon, and tucked away in one of them was a mine entrance where 5 heroes gathered before heading straight inside. Footsteps echo through the pitch black until Kino lights up the room with a lantern, realizing they've stumbled into an old abandoned mine. The old man says this mine used to be loaded with a rare metal called adamantium, but it's totally empty now. Though he mentions that if they could find even a tiny bit, the hero could forge a way stronger weapon for Main. The girl suddenly shouted out because she felt so bad, while Aquino pointed out exactly where that gross mystery liquid was, but you told her it was actually a bit further ahead. Suddenly, a swarm of massive ants are hanging from the ceiling right over their heads, and the elf screams that they showed up way too fast. Main shouted that these giant ants were basically armored monsters, and Aquino was totally caught off guard. Mode, Sasha, and Main didn't waste a second, jumping straight into the fight and totally wrecking the enemy. Furu shouted that the 3 of them fought hard, but he focused on Main since she was the real powerhouse of the group. Main slammed the monsters with a massive shockwave that actually shattered her sword, but luckily, she's got plenty of backups. Watching the girl fight, Fury finally put the pieces together. She said she'd heard rumors about this on her way here. It was a total weapon killer. Just like she warned, that lady. Main snaps another blade and grabs the next one, yelling that it's the very last sword in the box. She shouted that she was finally stepping in and started chanting a spell, calling on spirits to link her up with that tiny life. Suddenly, the grass in the mine exploded into massive stalks, totally shocking the heroes as the girl ordered the plants to plow through the ground with insane speed and power. Mo was totally shocked when the ground turned into a plowed field in a split second. The elf then gave the order to bury the sword deep into the soil. Once the work was finished, with her eyes shut tight, she said she could already see roots sprouting right out of the ground and the sword. They were popping up everywhere so fast it was insane, and she yelled that this skill was way too broken. A second later, she waves her hand and shouts a spell to speed up growth. Suddenly, swords start sprouting right out of the dirt. There were seriously so many of them. Sasha, Mode, and Aquino were totally floored, staring at the scene with their eyes wide and their jaws on the floor. Main bolted for the swords, grabbed a pair, and jumped right back into the action to blast those giant ants into tiny pieces. Everyone's jaws dropped because she wiped them out in seconds. Marin was totally blown away by what she saw. This meant she didn't have to carry a massive pile of weapons anymore. But, as they kept moving through the mine, Mo had asked where that gross liquid Fiorio mentioned was, and the girl told him she'd actually been to that spot before. People spotted that giant ant again and were totally shocked that any of them were still around. But the guy spots something weird. This isn't the same ant because the color is totally off. This one is bright red, and it charges straight at the crew like a rocket, looking ready to. Moad tried to smash through, but this thing was way tougher than the other black ones, and even when Main tried to land a hit, that ant was just way too fast. Sasha was totally useless too because her magic just wouldn't land on him. Furio told Aquino she'd handle the Santa guy herself. She promised to set things up so The elf stared him down with a super serious look, and he just stood there with his hand over his mouth, totally deep in thought about what he'd just heard. He shouted that he was down and told Mood and Sasha to cover Furyu's attack while he saved the final strike for himself. The elf starts casting spells on the grass again, turning those tiny blades into massive, towering plants. Our guy spotted a massive amount of ivy wrapping all around it. The elf flexed that there was so much ivy, there's no way anyone could dodge it, even if they were as fast as those ants. She was totally right, and with the ant stuck in her plant trap, she keeps him pinned and tells the rest of the heroes to go all out. One by one, they each stepped up and landed a massive hit. Main landed those final sword strikes and completely crushed that ant. The trap totally caved in, and the ant just shattered into a million tiny pieces. Wait, looking at the strict rules. 1. One line in equals one line out. Preserve the sequence exactly. Do not use any line breaks or new. The elf stood tall with her hands on her hips, bragging with a huge grin that this was the insane power of her ultimate support. Out of nowhere, our hero spots something glowing near the ants, and as Mode and Main rush over to see what it is, their faces light up with pure excitement. The hero's eyes literally turned into stars when they saw it was real adamantium, but right when he thought it was super rare, this ant just gulped the whole thing down. As Mode and Main checked out the metal, the other three stepped closer and spotted some weird liquid. Sasha asked if this was the gross liquid they were hunting for, and the Elfree told her she was totally right. The dark-haired girl noticed the puddle looked a lot like that gross liquid from before. But something about it was just off, and she had absolutely no idea how she even ended up in a place like this. She whipped out a test tube and said she was going to take it back to study exactly what this liquid was. Once they finished up inside the mind, they booked it straight for the exit. Before long, they were back outside and heading toward their cart. Out of nowhere, the elf mentioned that her strength. Aquino looked back at his friends who were all grinning with respect. Then he finally told Furu she passed the test and welcomed her into the shop. She's got a huge smile as she tells the hero it's only natural he takes care of her now, while Furu starts listing off the perks like a salary and 3 meals a day. She even asked to be paid in whipped cream while the heroes just chilled in their carts on the way back to the city. Halfway through their trip, they bumped into a familiar face. Aquino recognized her as Baron Dore, the hero he calls the Cold Secretary. Dore leaped out of her carriage and yelled that He asked the secretary what was going on, and she sounded totally desperate, begging them to get to the mansion right now before finally mentioning the gnomes. She shouted at the top of her lungs that they needed the heroes to save the gnome kingdom, and man, everyone was absolutely stunned. After the exams finally wrapped up, the hero took a quick break while the girl in the carriage turned to Kino and started chatting away. This elf is straight up eating whipped cream for lunch, claiming she's totally used to the taste since she's a fancy noble. He got everything ready and bragged that the elf would be totally blown away. But she just made excuses and swore she wouldn't be impressed at all. She took another bite and her mind was blown, making the guy smirk because he knew she'd finally realize it tasted way different. She said she made those sweet little hearts herself, but the whole dessert just melted in his mouth and tasted absolutely insane, while the hero noticed the whipped cream was way thicker this time since she didn't spend as long mixing it. The elf was totally loving it, while the girl turned bright red and accidentally spilled some cream right on her collarbone. Furia was totally unstoppable, refusing to give in to the dessert while hyping up Kino's cream as the absolute best. He blushes and tells her to get ready because an elf can't lose to some cream, but she just licks her spoon like a little kid and swears she'll never lose while her face turned bright red because that was just way too sweet for her to handle. The other 4 heroes just stood there gawking at the elf while the guy told her she better wipe that sweet stuff off. The recipe for that thick double cream was totally crossed out, with a new note saying Fourier isn't allowed to have it anymore. A carriage zooms toward the massive, gorgeous ram door mansion at insane speeds. The heroes and elves finally stepped out together, and as Aquino explained their plan to save the gnome kingdom, a guy nearby mentioned that a gnome messenger had just arrived looking for something special. Just then, the real Fuyu spotted her and asked why she was hanging out with the heroes, so she explained she joined their squad after seeing how insane the Kino shop's skills were. The elf called her a total weirdo, but she just shot back that the power of whipped cream is actually insane. The ram told them the gnome was totally wiped out, so he's just crashing in the next room for now. The door bursts open and 2 shadowy figures come crawling out, catching the heroes totally off guard. The moment the dwarf stepped up, Maud realized he'd met these guys before, and they were actually super stoked to see him too. One of the dwarves asks Mode what he's doing there, and if these are his friends, so Mode tells him it's a long story but he's actually working at a kino shop now as he introduces the whole crew. The guy chatting with Mo says he's Gaston, a traveling blacksmith who's totally fired up, while the quiet dwarf with the curly hair is his bodyguard, Barian. Gaston said he was stoked to meet everyone and mentioned he was on the hunt for a merchant, so after their brutal trip to the Elflands, he asked Baron if there was a trader around who could pull off any task. Mode rushed in to stop them, telling everyone to just keep moving and skip the usual flashy show. Maud asked why they were even trading, and if a war had started in the Dwarf Kingdom. But Gaston told him that what was actually happening was way scarier than any war. He shouted that the massive pillar was about to snap at any second, leaving Maud totally stunned and asking if he was actually for real. Gaston swears it's all true, explaining how a giant pillar once cracked and is still splitting apart today, but Aquino and the rest of the heroes are just confused because they have no idea. Mott drops a massive truth bomb that the giant tower is actually a pillar holding up their entire country underground. And our hero is so blown away he starts replaying every memory just to see if it's actually real. Maine jumped in to ask about that massive crack in the pillar, and Gaston warned that if it snapped, the whole ceiling would come crashing down, which is exactly why he was there to stop it. Gaston tells them these giant pillars have literally held his country together for thousands of years, and even though the cause of the crack is a total mystery, they need to fix it, ASAP. The dwarf looked super serious and told them that massive pillar was actually made of tons of rare adamantium, so now Gaston is hunting for a merchant to make a deal. Aquino turns to Maud to check on the adamantium they just scored from that old mine, and Maud tells him it's all good to go. Maud explained that his land used to be loaded with adamantium, which is why these pillars are made of the stuff, but since the mines are all dried up now, the dwarf just sat there totally lost in thought. Gaston demanded 100 massive carts packed with adamantium, and he made sure the drivers were trained to haul it all back to his country. Everyone there was totally floored by the news, and nobody saw a number that massive coming. Barian jumps in and says if they agree, they'll get 400,000 gold coins, be treated like total heroes, and even get special trade deals from the king himself. Gaston hung his head and closed his eyes, telling them they had to move right now or the Gnome Kingdom was toast. Aquino rubbed his chin, really thinking it over. That 400,000 gold is basically 4 billion yen, plus he'd get a direct line to The boy asked Mood how far the Gnome Kingdom was from the elves, and the gnome explained that while they look close on a map, they're actually buried way underground and the journey is going to take forever. He sat down and told the Baron that he already had a job sharing carriage tech, but if he took the dwarf deal, he was quitting his current gig right then and there. The Baron started waving his hands like crazy, shouting that the whole kingdom was in trouble and he had to go back up the dwarves right now. Then the Baron's secretary jumped in, saying a massive rainstorm hit the south yesterday and totally wrecked their crops. The elf shut down the Baron's whining and said she's totally down to help you and the gnomes, but she has to handle some business in this country first. They seriously needed a super fast wagon that could handle rough routes and spills, plus they had to stock up on a ton of food for the trip. Gaston was completely floored by the news, and the secretary told him that even though the ram tried to stop her, she just had to spill the truth. The girls saw all their drivers were ready to go, even the ones heading to the dwarves, along with 100 massive carts totally stacked with food. The hero's eyes practically popped out of his head when he heard that. That number was just way too massive to wrap his head around. The secretary started saying they'd pay him the full. He straight up told them there was no way to get that many wagons ready so fast. Plus, the dwarf situation was getting so bad it could literally wreck the entire country. Finally, he promised Aquino flashed a grin and asked his crew what they thought, but the heroes just looked back at him with total pride. Sasha promised that 100 giant adamantium carts were no big deal for the gnomes, since the new models hold just as much as the old ones anyway. She explains that the Elfland's soil trouble is actually coming from deep underground, so since the dwarves live down there, the secret to fixing the pollution might be in their kingdom, and they need to gear up to go find it. Maine wanted to feed the elves healthy veggies from the shop, and Furio suggested adding cream just to win over more fans. Most didn't really care about the countries, but he'd be super thankful if Aquino saved him, leaving Gaston and Baron totally clueless about what was happening. Aquino was super impatient, and even though taking on 2 massive requests at once should have been impossible, he knew he could do it now that the hero had shared the secret of the cultivation skill. The hero looked at the shocked elves and dwarves and announced that his shop was taking on both jobs. Gaston couldn't wrap his head around how the guy greeted him so fast, and Vova was just as shocked by the whole thing. Mo tells the group that if Aquino says he's got this, he really does, so they need to trust him. And suddenly Baron and Gaston are both yelling at the top of their lungs for Aquino to save them. The heroes marched out of the palace feeling totally hyped and ready to get to work. Akino told everyone they needed to start with a solid plan first. He ordered Main and Furu to make their... Mudu ordered his crew to show the elves how to drive the carts, since these new models were way too confusing for anyone to figure out on their own. Sasha gets put in charge of upgrading the cart's tires using parts from monsters. These wheels need to be tough enough to handle the crazy roads in dwarf and elf territory. She's totally hyped. The guy shouted to his squad with total pride that it was finally time to get to work. While everyone was busy grinding, Main was out expanding the fields and Sasha was in the lab testing different liquids and bottles. Moad slowly taught the elves how to get moving with the carts, while Furry used her magic to grow the plants and expand their territory. A bit later, a massive field opened up right in front of Kino, and Main shouted that the expansion was finally finished. The guy slammed this massive chunk of adamantium onto the dirt, said it had to be buried, and started digging right then and there. He asked her to start doing that thing she showed him in the mine, so she told him he'd have to feed her some cream later as a reward. She fires off a growth spell, and suddenly, massive chunks of adamantium start sprouting up all over the place. He hyped her up for being so fast and told the adamantium crew to keep the momentum going, promising to bring in way more food and a ton of new carts. The moon was already high in the sky when Akeno walked inside and found Muda sitting at the table, busy working on something. Maud spoke his mind, saying he could totally handle the adamantium to forge a sick weapon for the main girl, and he's pretty much ready for whatever goes down next. He realized Moed just couldn't sit still without working, so he decided it was time to step up and give it his all too. 5 days pass and the squad meets back at the Baron's palace, where the two gnomes, the Baron, and his secretary, are all staring at a totally insane view. There were exactly 100 carts full of adamantium on the street, and right across from them were another 100 carts loaded with supplies for the elves. The 4 of them were totally shook because there was no way they could grab that much stuff in just 5 measly days. Akino explains that this ride is a special service that's way faster than a normal carriage, and they even plan to teach the elves how to build them later, leaving Gaston and the Baron totally stunned that the heroes prepped everything so quickly. Gaston and the Baron shouted that all these supplies and adamantium were enough to save everyone. Then they stood tall and told the heroes to take their reward. They hopped into the carts and said they had to get moving right now. The carts start rolling out right away, and while Aquino wonders what's going down in the Gnome Kingdom, he's sure they'll be totally fine no matter what. They marched right into Gnome territory with their heads held high, looking totally fearless. A bit later, Shoji and his squad finally pull up to this massive area. He was totally shocked and realized this was the entrance to the gnomes' underground kingdom, where a massive line of horse-drawn carts was streaming through. Main pointed out the massive slanted gate, but Mode just smirked and told him it was actually an entrance to the underground. Shoji recognized the spot where they fought those massive ants in the Elflands, and after checking his mental map, he realized they were right on top of it. Out of nowhere, a weird gap opened up at the end of the arched stone tunnel, and a ton of carts were heading straight into it. Shoshu realizes they're definitely heading deep into the earth, so he asks Mood why the dwarves even live underground, when they could probably just live on the surface instead. Muda explains they used to live on the surface, but after things went south, they moved underground and hit the jackpot with a massive ore vein that's perfect for a tribe of blacksmiths. They dug all the way down to the ore and found this massive cave. Then the Dwarf King turned it into their home and built the very first city, and Shoji thought the whole legend was... The driver suddenly turns to Muda and asks if this is really just the start, so Muda just smirks and asks if he seriously hadn't realized that yet. Shuji was totally shocked that the tunnel was glowing without any torches, but Muda explained it was just glow moss leading to the underground kingdom, and asked if he could see all right. Judgy thought it was just some glowing paint on the ground and figured it was pretty handy for a fantasy world. But then Main suddenly cut them off and told Shoji to look over there. They spotted these giant glowing pillars covered in sick art, and Shoji and Main were both totally blown away by how incredible it looked. Sasha points out these massive mithril pillars with insane carvings, but Main notices the color is totally different from her own mithril sword. Muda said these pillars were basically a welcome sign for the country, and they put in extra work so nobody would mess with them, making Shuji realize that dwarf tech was on a hole. He noticed the walls were super smooth and covered in paintings, so Muda explained it was the legend of how the dwarf kingdom began, making Shoji ask for the whole story. The driver told them they'd headed straight underground, a legend from way back when the whole world was a total dangerous mess. Back then, the world was a total nightmare crawling with scary monsters everywhere. One group of people built massive walls just to stay safe. Others vanished into the deep woods, while some literally ran for their lives. Muda explains his dwarf ancestors hid underground to survive. Main points out how rough it was for them, And then Muta shows them a wall painting that leaves everyone totally shocked. He says this is how his ancestors built a safe home for everyone, even making the underground gates slanted so monsters couldn't just barge right in. And Sasha mentions that trying to open a sewer. Shogi points out that legends are always mixed with stuff people made up later, and he's starting to wonder if any of it actually happened. Moda says nobody has a clue. This story went down way back in the day, like generations ago. It wouldn't really be a legend if people actually remembered what happened back then. Sasha says the research shows that traces of ancient monsters are being found all over the world. The experts are calling this a massive dungeon breakout, and Shoji knew that if this happened everywhere, the whole world would be in the exact same nightmare. The dwarves say their ancestors escaped underground, and this tunnel is a massive tribute to those who risked it all for a better future. Built by engineers who poured their literal blood, sweat, and tears, Shoji realized that every time they fixed a broken part, they swapped it for high-tech gear, and that's how this insane tunnel was born. Muta finally shouts that they're almost at the kingdom, grinning like crazy as a blinding white light flashes right in front of them. As they stepped out of the tunnel, Muta told them they were back in their own country, and everyone was totally blown away. Main almost tumbled out of the carriage because she was so shocked by the view, realizing this underground world was way bigger and brighter than she ever expected. Shoji was totally stunned by the dwarf country, but Muta suddenly snapped him out of it by pointing at a massive machine in the distance. He said it was this massive, unbreakable pillar that held up the entire kingdom. Suddenly, Shuji spots a massive crack splitting right through that giant pillar. Shoji asks if the adamantite can fix the damage, and Muta explains they're gonna melt it down and pour it into the cracks to reinforce the whole thing. Shuji asks if this messy plan is actually gonna work, but Muta says he's only giving him the basics since the real method is a total secret, and Shoji totally gets. The Baron announced they found a spot for the supplies and his guys would handle the unloading, but Shoji's crew was ordered to stay put. Shuji thought about it for a second and called it a total masterpiece, and Main totally agreed that this place was just on another level. Suddenly, one of the dwarves says sorry for waking Shoji up so early. He tells him that their big boss wants to see him right now. Shoji is totally confused and starts questioning everything in his... A bit later, the king called Shoji's squad the Brave Merchants and thanked them for stepping up to save his kingdom. The guy introduces himself as Mirodo Yuguelas Deus, and Mura confirms that he's actually the king of their entire country. Shoji's hunch was totally right, but now Shoji gave a polite bow and introduced himself as a traveling merchant named Akina, but the man told him to drop the formal talk since the boys had already done so much for him. He stared at the massive crates of ore and couldn't believe the kid scored that much adamantite so fast. Shoji figured he finally brought enough to save the country from its big crisis, so the man let him through. He was so hyped about the amazing work at Aiken's shop that he gave them a special thank you note on top of all that cash. He speaks for Miro Yugel's Deus and tells everyone that Akina Shoji just got promoted to Underground Gate Chief. Shogi asked Muta what the Underground Gate Chief title was all about, and once Muta explained it's basically like being a human count, Shogi realized the dwarf says the king is actually the best builder in the land, and he even found a weak spot in this massive cave and built 2 pillars almost all by himself, so getting a title from a legend like that is a total flex. Main thought it was awesome, and Sasha grinned, pointing out that since Shoji was a noble now, every girl in town would be chasing him, though the elf joked that even being a lord, Shoji actually believed he was a high-class noble. He knew that fancy title would let him get away with way more. But right then, a crazy thought popped into his head. Shuji thanked the king for the awesome offer but straight up rejected it, leaving the king absolutely stunned. Shoji said a big title would just tie his hands in business, but Muta told him to knock it off. The king suddenly bursts out laughing and admits it's totally true, saying he's actually wanted to quit his throne for ages just so he could spend all his time being a blacksmith instead. He nods and says he gets it, but instead of giving the kid a fancy title, he decides to find another way. And Shoji's actually relieved since being a noble sounds like a total drag anyway. Main told Shoji he took a total loss. Sasha agreed. The elf said he'd only give up the king's spot, and Muta shot back that he didn't want the title either. Shuji figured the job was finally over since everything went off without a hitch, and the king even hooked them up with a place to crash so they could finally get some rest. They've even got some super tasty meals made out of root veggies. The gnomes were totally hyped and begged the boys to tell them stories about the surface. The girls were loving it, and immediately, they head out, but as he turns around, he spots a massive pillar with a giant crack that's suddenly leaking something crazy. The next morning, the dwarves thanked him for the hilarious story and begged him to come back to the shop soon. Muta says the elf driver already took off, so they're heading back, but Shoji asks him if he's actually gonna stay. Muta said they delivered the adamantite and their job was finally done, but right then, the king suddenly called for Shuji. Shuji asked what was up, and as the king struggled to explain, Shoji cut him off to ask if that was really some weird liquid leaking out of a crack in the huge pillar. The king was totally down and said he'd talk to the guy later, but for now, he just had to sit back and watch. They eventually find a hut with some weird liquid inside, and a dwarf tells them the morning patrol spotted this stinky stuff leaking from a crack in a floor pillar. Sasha was totally shocked and asked if it was really on the floor instead of the ceiling, but the king explained that the barn roof was actually melting and dripping down. Shuji noticed a funky smell as the liquid started melting everything, making him realize it was probably straight-up acid. The girls stared at the liquid, and Sasha realized it looked exactly like the stuff they found back in the elven mines. Sure, she realized that this weird pollution wasn't just stuck in the elves' ancient rocks and mines, because the exact same sludge was being found all the way over in the dwarf kingdom too. Sasha leaned in and whispered that she definitely wanted to check this out for herself. Shogi apologized and gave the green light to study these two, since they're basically the best scientists for humans and elves. The king was totally down and gave them full access to the research lab to investigate, so Shoji thanked him for the huge favor. The kings finally explained why they stalled, saying they might need more adamantite for repairs later, and Shoji was totally caught off guard. The guy says this crack just showed up a week ago, right in the middle of the night after a massive bang. Some think those recent mini-quakes are to blame, but they're totally stuck and can't find out for sure without cutting down that massive pillar. This morning they finally figured out that if the liquid is leaking, it means there's a tiny hole in there. Main asks G if everything's cool, and since it's just a tiny hole, it's still totally solid. Shoji knows that if they run out of adamantite when things go south, they're in huge trouble. He spots a crack and a tiny hole leaking that same weird liquid from the elf mine. Out of nowhere, a massive sound echoed through the dwarf kingdom, catching everyone off guard, and when Shoji asked what was happening, Main told him the whole place was shaking. The shaking suddenly cut out, which was super weird, and Shoji mentioned these quakes only started happening recently. Muta claims these tremors are totally new, and the king backs him up, saying everyone thinks the shaking is exactly what caused that huge crack. The king told the guys to chill out because a little shaking wasn't enough to wreck the Great Pillar, especially since they've been guarding that legendary crystal tech for generations. But Shuji suggests heading to the research hotel, but she insists on checking on Sasha and Furu first, and the king totally agrees that's the best move. A bit later, the gang catches up with Sasha and Furio. Shoji asks if the girls are doing okay, and they say they're fine. Sasha tells the kid he needs to. Sasha says the liquid dripping off that high column is a perfect match for the stuff from the elven mine. They might look almost identical, but there's a tiny difference because the liquid from the high column is way more acidic than the stuff in the shaft. The elf says the gunk poisoning their land is almost exactly like the other two liquids, but it's just different enough that all three are similar but totally unique. Shoji realized they just stumbled onto a huge clue about the elven country's soil problem, so they decided to leave those two alone for now, as long as the king was cool with it. Shuji asks where they're headed, but Muta just brushes him off until they finally reach the dwarves, who are totally hyped to see them. Muta laughed and told Shoji he'd already made a ton of friends in the city, and Shoji mentioned how everyone was super hyped after hearing about his business plans yesterday. Shoji explains that everyone here is a master builder, and Muta adds that their whole job is fixing up the city their ancestors left behind, making the young dwarf decide he's definitely going. Muta tells Shoji to keep moving, and after a bit, they finally reach the spot. Shoji asks if they're really there, and Muta reveals that this place used to be his house. He admits it's all true, saying the stuff made in this land is amazing, then points at the guy and declares he's going to be a legendary craftsman right here. Every builder here is totally obsessed with their history and the old school stuff, living only to fix and protect these treasures because they're all absolute legends at what they do. Back then, he decided he needed a fresh start, so he packed up his life, emptied the house, and straight up ditched the country for good. He came back to see a king and a kingdom that stayed exactly the same. He couldn't help but compare himself to all the other dwarf blacksmiths around. Those other guys had spent their... He's officially lost his right to protect the country, and has no clue how things got this messy. But Shoji tells Maud that he's actually been training for this moment, and a whole lot more. Muta admitted that without Shoji's ability to grow adamantite, they would have been totally finished, and he thanked the young hero for literally saving the entire country. Muta turned back and told everyone they were heading to the inn since checking the girls would take a while, and after what the king said, they were staying put because he absolutely refused to work. It was super late when the city lights suddenly cut out, but Shoji just figured that's how it worked since the same thing happened the night before. These dwarves are dead set on protecting their legendary old-school skills, and even though Modes claimed he was doing something different, he's still a craftsman deep down. Muda has every right to protect his home just like everyone else, but he's totally stuck in the past and is one seriously stubborn craftsman. Suddenly, the ground starts shaking like crazy again, and Shoji bolts out of the room yelling that this one is way worse than before. Muda had no clue what was going on, so he bolted into the street and hoped the column was still okay. They started sprinting toward the pillar, but suddenly, they just froze up in total terror. Suddenly, this massive ant monster just bursts right out of the column. Shuji stared at the massive ant, realizing it was way bigger than the ones in the mine, and even larger than the Architrol from the Great Escape. It crawled right out of a... Muda recognized the beast and freaked out because it was an iron eater, while Shuji just asked what that thing even was. Suddenly, a ton of arrows slammed into the giant ant, but the monster didn't even care. Muda told them they were the kingdom's elite warriors, but Shuji realized their arrows couldn't even pierce the ant's thick shell. Muda yelled that a basic bow wouldn't. Muda said the thing had a rock-solid white body, confirming it was definitely an iron eater, while Shoji wondered if a monster like that was actually a threat. Muda explains it's a legendary beast that wrecks mines and devours metal, and Shoji is totally blown away that a monster could actually eat stuff like that. Shuji realized that while normal ants eat wood, these crazy ants from another world actually munch on metal. Think about it. Almost every tool we use is made of metal. If these things can... Muta says these iron eaters are found all over the world and used to be seen as totally harmless. But once they started devouring entire mines and all the ore, every country finally realized how big of a threat they actually were. Word is the entire world saw him as a monster and crushed him in a massive battle, and while the details of that war are a total mystery, they were definitely wiped off the face of the earth. Choji realized the monsters they thought were dead were actually still moving, and things were looking seriously bad for them. The Twerven warriors kept hacking at the monster hiding in the pillar's cracks, and they were totally caught off guard by what was happening. Shogi thought the monster was finally gone, but then the ground started shaking again, which meant the beast was coming right back out. Out of nowhere, a ton of rubble came crashing down, but Main and Sasha quickly used their powers to shield themselves from the mess. Shreji wondered why they weren't all just making a run for the surface. That Iron Eater was busy munching on a massive pillar from the inside out. If it keeps this up, the gnomes were screaming that they had to fix the mess before he crawled out of that crack again. Just then, Muda spotted a tiny gnome desperately trying to put his house back together. Shuji says fixing the country is the top priority, but Muda fires back that in this land, a craftsman's pride is worth way more than his own life. Suddenly, massive chunks of rubble smashed down right where the little gnome was building his home, making Muda freak out before he gritted his teeth as the tiny guy finally saw the danger falling from the sky. Out of nowhere, Muda catches a massive rock to shield the little dwarf, making Shoji freak out as Muda's hands start shaking from the weight. Muda yanked the rock up and yelled, and right then, Shoji started screaming Main's name. She snatched up a rock and chucked it right at the one Muda was holding. The stones smashed together and went flying, so Shoji called for Sasha, who reached out her hands and agreed they had to stay on this country's good side if they wanted to keep using the lab. She threw up a massive wall of magic seals to shield Muda and the little dwarf. Shoji screams for Furia, and she's so hyped she asks for extra whipped cream on her snack while catching a huge chunk of falling rubble mid-air. Muda hit up the guys and was totally shocked when Shogi told him they actually liked working overtime, even if they didn't really want to do it. But he honestly thinks they can pull it off if the crew is really down for it. Muda was totally stunned, but Shoji was already planning to use his partner, the Iron Eater, to crush Muda's kingdom, and he knew there was no turning back now. Shoji told him to beat it because he was about to get some crazy overtime service from Aiken's shop. Shoji announced they're helping their dwarf business partners, and since he's paying a ton of overtime, Main is totally on board. Shoji wanted to scope things out first, but the locals refused to run because they were staying to fight for their city. The giant pillar holding up the whole country is about to snap. That monster could burst out of the tower and attack again at any second. Tons of warriors got totally wrecked trying to defend their home. Shoji knew things were looking really bad, so he told everyone they had to take care of the injured guys first. Shuji checked if Sasha had taken her healing potions, and after she showed him her jar, he suggested using wood chips to build a simple shutter for their crops. Next, the elf named Furia triggers her growth acceleration skill, and a massive pile of potions suddenly appears. Shoji was hyped and said he'd tell the warriors, but they still had to get those stubborn villagers out of there because Main knew fighting would be a total disaster with civilians around. Shogi looked over at the guy while Muta asked Sasha if she could use her magic to broadcast her voice to the whole country, and she was totally down for it. She triggered her magic, And as Muta started begging everyone to listen, the crowd stared in total shock because they all thought he had already ditched the country. Muta turned to the crowd and told everyone they needed to get out of there right now. He just dropped this on them out of nowhere, so nobody actually believed him. He ditched. But when he finally got back home, they all kept standing up for their work and loving what they built because he's convinced they all share the exact same roots. He finally gets why the dwarves refuse to run away. But he's sure that anyone who actually cares about their home will be strong enough to handle whatever hits them next. Muta snaps and tells them he can't explain why, but they need to bolt right now, leaving Shogi and Main totally stunned by Shogi's sudden speech. Suddenly, the king shows up and tells Mood to let him take the floor. He reveals that he's the king of the Murdo dwarves. He tells everyone that besides the soldiers, Muto was seriously moved that the king was totally on board with his plan. Murdo explained that it doesn't matter if their traditions start to fade or get destroyed, as long. The king shouted for everyone to get out, telling them to group up or just run for it alone toward the surface, and soon every dwarf was scrambling to escape. Shoji pulls out a box of potions for the soldiers, and the dwarfs are totally hyped to see so many high-quality heals. They thank him and say that with these, they can... The king thanked a con shop and said only the Iron Eater was left, but right then, a massive crash shook the whole building. The Gnome King freezes and shouts that the monster is finally showing up. Just like that, a massive ant spawns right next to the Great Column. The king yells that they're totally gonna crush this. Everyone lost it when that ant popped up away from the pillar, realizing the monster could tunnel through the ground however it wanted. The king reveals that those monsters have tunneled under the entire country, not just the pillar, leaving a terrified Shoji wondering if they're trying to turn the whole land into a massive ant nest. Those earthquakes were actually just him moving around underground, and the king says arrows are useless because he can just slip through any hole to escape. The king was completely stuck and had no idea how to strike. Shoji realized that using massive magic or a manager nade might snap that weak pillar or even level the whole kingdom. And the big problem, they needed a perfect direct hit because the king wasn't letting this monster trash the place, so he told the captain to bring out their brand new secret weapon. Suddenly, this massive ballista rolls out, and Shoji is losing it over how huge the bow is. The king claims it's the strongest weapon in the whole country, a giant mechanical. Shoji realized he didn't have to blow everything sky high, and could just use a precise hit to keep the damage low. The king warned that if this fails, the whole kingdom is history. The knight captain swore they'd take that guy down for sure. Every master blacksmith poured their soul into building this insane mechanical bow. The captain roared that their army was the strongest around and then screamed for everyone to open fire. Huge arrows attack slammed straight into the giant ant, and the king was hyped that his plan actually worked. These Iron Eaters literally can't feel any pain. You have to hit them with a massive wave of attacks just to take them down. Shoji was totally blown away that these ants were... Suddenly, the ant blasts out a massive wave of fluid, and the guy finally realizes this is the exact same gross stuff he saw dripping from the pillar. Using that liquid, the ant literally melted the ground away. Once the dirt turned into mush, it started digging through it. Just like that, the ant headed back deep underground. The king warned that if he got away, he'd just come back and wreck the kingdom whenever he felt like it. This was their absolute last shot. He ordered everyone to fire every single stake they... Roped arrows started slamming right into the ants, and the king yelled that it was perfect, ordering everyone to shoot and pull at the same time while Shoji just stood there totally shocked by how powerful that stone bow was. The warriors started diving right at the ant, but Shoji thought they were being way too reckless. Out of nowhere, an ant pops up right on their ledge and pulls back a mechanical bow. He's got a few stakes left, but with the mechanical bow totally trashed, there's nothing left to stop this monster. It's phasing right through the ground and leaving the whole country full of holes. But the guy doesn't even flinch since he can't feel pain. And by now, the damage. They're so close, but should they really round up every mage for one massive spell that'll wreck the whole place? That would totally destroy the country, and they don't even have enough magic users to take him down anyway. The king couldn't even believe he actually had to go through with this. The elf says her spirit magic could stop the attack, but the power would level the entire city. And Sasha admits that even with all her gear, she's totally out of options too. Shoji realized that sharp stake attacks were the absolute best move here, but right then, Main told him it was finally her turn to step up. She couldn't have beaten him at full strength, but now that the dwarves have worn him down, she knows she's got this. Shaji bragged that nothing could touch him, but Main just pointed at some wooden stakes and showed him he was wrong, leaving Shaji totally blown away by his insane skills. Shochi thought it over and gave Mayan the green light, so Mayan cut Muta off and said there was a specific outfit he wanted the girl to wear. A little while later, she's fully geared up, and he reveals he's been crafting this super strong adamantine armor for her since before he even stepped foot in this country. He explained the armor is super tough and uses carriage springs to help you move, which Main loved while Shoji realized it was basically a real-life power suit. The elf explained that this tough armor actually makes moving a breeze, and Muda and Main just clicked their gear with a huge grin. Shoji hits up Sasha to see if she has any poison for the Iron Eater, and she tells him she can mix a bug spray potion with some special elf sap neutralizer to get the job done. She suggested a poison to wreck them and stop them from escaping into the ground with their body fluids. Shoji thought it was a solid plan, and Main was hyped that Sasha pulled it off so fast. Shogi walks up to Furyu and tells her they're gonna help with the farming. Then he orders Muda to get that guy to poison the steak and go help Main out. Shuji shouts that the mission is finally starting, but he knows they have to keep their secret training hidden from the king, so Mood tells the king they're just going to look for more weapons. While hiding behind the shutters, Shuji explained the move. Bury the steaks they found and then trigger that cultivation skill. This is where you level up like crazy and reach your final form. Shoji's super pumped and lets everyone know that everything is finally ready to go. Finally, that massive beast showed its face. Muda told Shogi he'd already coated all the spears in deadly poison. Shogi called Muda over and gave Main the signal to start the mission. Suddenly, he hurls the spear right into the ant's body and then starts spamming as many spears as he can possibly throw. The dwarf knight leader was totally shocked and said they should have been almost out of stakes, but the king shot back that there was no way that was true. He said this girl slams stakes into enemies with more power than a giant crossbow. Everyone was blown away by just how crazy strong she is. Main felt like this armor made moving around super easy. Plus, suddenly the monster started spitting out liquid, and Shoji was sure it was about to dive back into the ground. The king is totally shocked when the ground doesn't melt like he expected. Shoji realizes that Sasha's poison is actually working. Even the monster is starting to slow down and lose its... Everyone locked in for their big opening as Main grabbed a spear, screamed that she wasn't backing down, and hurled it straight at the monster. The king and the knight captain were totally on edge, screaming for everyone to get moving. Main got ready to toss her last spear, let out a huge scream, and used all her power to send it flying. The spear slammed straight into the monster's head, taking him out for good. The beast finally lost all its strength and took its very last breath. Everyone breathed a huge sigh of relief now that the Iron Eater finally went totally silent. The king says they already took him out. These Iron Eaters were supposed to be extinct, so no one knows how one is still walking around. Sasha points out some weird goo dripping from a tall... Shoji hears a weird noise right before this massive pillar starts crashing down, and everyone is totally freaking out.